Thank you, God, for this earth, our home. Please unmute your audio for the wide sky and the blessed sun, for the air
For the
we
air
breathe,
we breathe, and the water,
for the
for the
towering
towering
hills,
hills,
and
and
the
the
whispering
whispering
wind,
wind,
for
for
the
the
richness
richness and the
riches and the
diversity of
diversity
our
of our
land,
land,
and
and
all
for
and
all
all that
that you
you
have provided us.
states. Jana, God touch our hearts with
Hearts, the glorious oneness of all creation,
penetrate our
penetrate our souls with the beauty of the stars,
awaken
awaken
our
our
minds
minds for a productive
our
life, with
knowledge
knowledge to achieve sustainable development
for our
for
country.
our country, despite any pandemic. Amen.
Slide, please. Okay, I just want to go through this very quickly. The MAP Sustainable Development Committee and partners is perhaps the biggest group now in MAP, because we opened it to partners who are not members of MAP, but who are contributing significantly also to the sustainable development of our country. And so we have several task forces that are working on different aspects of sustainable development. And we are guided by, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, that's the main mandate. The keywords are the ones on white, sustainable development, with active participation of the communities concerned and in partnership with other stakeholders. Next. So we are guided by the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. But because these are not too easy to remember, although as we go on and work on some of them more deeply, then we get to put them in our minds. So we have our simplified stool. May you have that? Joanna? Okay, yeah, all of it. So in the Philippines, for those who are not from the Philippines, we have this popularly known 4Ps. Although the meaning is different from how we use it here. So we have person. We are saying that sustainable development must come from the individual. Then we have people, the social aspect, and you can have their other Ps like partnership. Then we have environment. I think it's not showing. Okay, environmental, which is, we're not literally translating that to planet, and economic, which is prosperity. So that's our 4Ps of sustainable development. Next one, please. We have, in this group, we have 300 members who are mappers and partners. But in MAP, we have more than 1,000 members, and several of the members here are regular or lifetime life members of MAP. And as I said, we have different task forces. We have the task force on recovering with nature that's co-chaired by our former socioeconomic planning secretary, Shell Habito, and Attorney Ipat Luna, who is from the DNR, now detailed to Senator Loren Legarda. And then we have task force number 3, which we just created because we are having our second project under good health and well-being, which we will announce today, plus other task forces that are addressing other SDGs and needs of specific sites and projects. Our motto is pray hard, work hard, and play hard. Okay? Next. Joanna, bilisan ng konti, ano? So this is Manamo. This is our 4th year. I think even Inquirer doesn't know that this is our 4th year because they removed the 4 in my article. And if you want to know more about it, kindly go back to Monday's issue of Inquirer to read my column piece there. My marine biodiversity is our possibly most important natural asset, no? But there is poor awareness of what we have and still limited action on what we can do to tap the opportunities, to conserve, to protect. And so we try to celebrate, observe this just to remind ourselves and others that this is such an important characteristic of our country, that we are a maritime and archipelagic nation. And this year, I think we have improved magnitude of activities, but the but there is sometimes I feel we are talking to ourselves, those who are working on this, because the bigger population of our country does not know much about it. Next. Joanna. So we will be focusing our discussion on the blue economy. And there are many interpretations of this, from Gunther Pauli's blue economy, meaning the planet is blue and we have to aim for zero waste for us to be a sustainable planet. And that is different from what others are using to interpret it, like PEMSIS is more focused on ocean. But what we want is that the blue economy in our committee work will include all blue, all sorts of water, oceans, seas, lakes, and rivers, because they're all interconnected after all. But we will focus first on oceans, because that by itself is already complicated. Next one. So our objectives for this webinar are: first, to observe and celebrate Manamo, engage you all in the work to include our natural capital in policy and decision making. What do I mean by cap it? We need to have knowledge, we have to have the right attitude, and we need to practice the protection, conservation, tapping of opportunities sustainably. And then we'd like to invite you to help us achieve SDG number 3, which is the other aspect of our discussion, and all other SDGs on the blue environment. There are many that affect water, from let me see that, my código, clean water and sanitation, life below water, climate change. A lot of those are dealing with water. So administrative matters, my last slide for this intro. We have a chat box for admin questions, Q&A, for substantive questions. Some may not be raised and answered now, but we'll do our best to act on them. So we will take note of all of your questions, and we will ask our experts here and our guests to help us answer them if they are tough ones. Now, the PowerPoints, the bios, we'll give a link because we will upload this somewhere. And now I just want us all to open our video so that we can have a photo gallery. Okay, and please look at your camera so that everybody will look nice, smiling. Okay. Are you ready, Joanna? Joanna?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you ready? Okay. Count naman, 1, 2, 3. I think you have to do that in batches. Tell us when you're done. Baka mangawit yung aming mga ngiti.
I'm done.
Okay, so do I have anything else there? If none, we will go to our first formal part of the program, our welcome remarks from the President of the Management Association of the Philippines, Attorney Francis Lim.
Thank you very much, Cora. How are you? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Board of Governors and the MAP Sustainable Development Committee of the Management Association of the Philippines, or MAP. I welcome you all to this very special webinar on moving forward with our MANA towards a sustainable blue economy, which I understand is being held in celebration of the Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month. Thank you for holding this webinar. Many thanks to our guest speakers, the Stanford University Natural Capital Project founder and faculty director, Dr. Gretchen Daly, and House of Representatives Deputy Speaker, our very own Lauren Legarda. Thanks also to our presenters and actors, Dr. Rodora Asansa of the National Academy of Science and Technology, Congressman Jose Benitez, Ms. Marilyn Elizabeth Colette of Mercy Ships International, Dr. Laura David of UP Marine Science Institute, Dr. Marian de Los Angeles of REX, and Maria Corazon Ebarvia of PEMSEA, of course, Dr. Shelito F. Habito, Attorney Ipat Luna from the Office of the Deputy Speaker of Congresswoman Legarda, Mr. Maximo Rico Herboso of MCPI Corporation, Ms. Rina Maria Rosales of USAID, and Admiral George Usabia Jr. of the Philippine Coast Guard. Let me also thank the MAP Sustainable Development Committee Chair, Cora Claudio, for putting together this webinar in coordination with our other business groups. Today's webinar is part of MAP Sustainable Development Committee's programs for the year in helping ensure adherence to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In today's webinar, it will be interesting to hear from our speakers and presenters how the country can move forward towards a sustainable blue economy. We're fortunate to be able to listen to the presentations on the latest and major developments along this line and what other countries and leading ecological economies are now doing on blue economy. Through the presentations and the speeches, we hope to hear answers to the following questions. For example, why is natural capital accounting important? How can the business sector help in natural capital accounting even if there's no law that tells business managers to do so? What are the benefits of doing it? What's the most important thing to do? What are the current and latest policy measures on blue economy in Congress? What are some of the positive impact of natural capital valuation in the Philippines? I think in addition to these questions, there are a lot of questions from our participants, which I think as of September 23, already we saw registrations of over 100 just for Zoom. Many are also expected to watch this webinar via Facebook live streaming. Let me take this opportunity to announce that in line with our theme to promote the environment, the MAP will have as its GMM topic on October 13, ESG and linkage to long-term value creation, with no less than Matthew Nelson of Ernst & Young Australia as our speaker, and our friends TG Limcaco of Ayala Corporation, and Ms. Nanette Medved Po of Friends and Hope and Generation as reactors. I think this is the 48th webinar that we are holding alone and in conjunction with other organizations since the lockdown happened in March. On top of this MAP organized webinars, we've partnered with other organizations like the Business World, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Finex, FinTech Alliance PH, Integrity Initiative, John Clements, Manila Times, Meralco, Pasha, Paymaya, PDRF, PMAP, Sharefield, PCI, and Viventis to deliver topics to our members and other participants. Please watch out for other announcements for forthcoming webinars as they may be of help and interest to you. In closing, again, thank you for organizing this webinar. Thank you one and all for making time to attend it. Keep well, everyone. Enjoy the webinar. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Francis. May we have the bio introduction of our first technical speaker, Joanna. Dr. Shell Habito will be our speaker who will talk about the Philippines as a man and economic perspective. And I will just flash the highlights of his bio, but this will be available with the documents that we will upload somewhere, and we will advise you about it. Okay, so currently he's professor at Ateneo de Manila University, which is one of our top universities here. And as I mentioned earlier, he served as a member of the cabinet in charge of NEDA. Now he chairs Brain Trust Inc., which does consulting also. And he writes a weekly column that is well read, No Free Lunch. He is founding chair of the Philippine Council for Sustainable Development and the chair of the 6th session of the UN Commission on Sustainable Development. He previously worked at UP, World Bank, and other organizations that you can see here. He holds a PhD and MA in economics from Harvard, Master of Economics from University of New England, BS Agriculture, Agricultural Economics, summa cum laude from UPLB. So, Shell?
Thank you very much, Cora, and for this kind introduction. Let me put up my screen now. Okay. My role in the program is to provide some context and again, introduce the Philippines as a man, as provocatively done by Cora on the acronym, meaning a maritime and archipelagic nation. Well, let me first begin by pointing out precisely, this is a country which is an archipelagic state composed of 7,641 islands. That's by the latest count of our National Mapping Authority. It also, based on our exclusive economic zone, really consists of 4/5 water and only 1/5 land. In that sense, it's similar to Indonesia, which has more than twice as many islands as we do, 17,508 according to the record. And not coincidentally perhaps, Indonesia and the Philippines happen to be the lagging countries in the ASEAN 5, the original 5 members of the ASEAN. So one begins to wonder, the archipelagic nature of our countries really is a reason why there is also underdevelopment? Well, I submit that no, it need not be. Japan is similarly an archipelago of 6,852 islands, and we all know that Japan's level of development is much higher than Indonesia's or the Philippines. I guess what matters is how we manage that water part of our territories. And so there are indeed peculiar challenges to being an archipelagic nation. First, the cost and efficiency of internal transport can be very challenging and varies much more widely, especially because of the challenge of inter-island versus land transport. There's also more limited scope for economies of scale in infrastructure, especially in energy and provision of power. And so we can't really have a very large grid, and there are separate grids by island group, although there's been an interconnection of that partially. It's also more expensive and less efficient in terms of communication network. And indeed, we are one of the worst performing countries in terms of internet speed and internet availability. And of course, physically, people-to-people contacts are constrained by our geography. And so building a sense of nationhood and oneness as a nation, especially through political and cultural unity, is a much, much greater challenge in an archipelagic nation like ours. But it does have its upsides. No? Our waters are immensely rich in natural resources and economic value. A given area of sea could in fact contain higher potential economic value than a corresponding area of undeveloped land. The challenge is to harness that value sustainably. That is, without depleting the marine resources or destroying the marine habitats via pollution or outright destruction. For example, unsustainable fishing methods like dynamite fishing. So in fact, to illustrate this, one might question, do reclamation activities that reclaim land from the sea, do they compromise more than what is gained from the new land-based activities and economic activities for the shorter term? Well, it seems to me that's a valid question to ask when we assess our reclamation projects. The blue economy, as Cora already defined earlier, we would like to broadly define to be the entire ecosystem, the entire planet Earth. But again, very prominent and dominant, in fact, is the oceans. So the usual definitions of the blue economy, therefore, capture these different elements. First is capture fisheries, shipping and ports, shipbuilding, offshore and oil gas, marine construction, marine and coastal tourism, marine transport, marine business services, marine research and development, and dredging. Those are the established industries as of now in the so-called blue economy. In the emerging industries, there's also now coming up marine aquaculture, offshore wind and energy, ocean renewable energy, marine seabed mining, safety and surveillance, marine biotechnology, and high-tech marine services, among others, actually. We have not even had an exhaustive list here of what are the economic activities surrounding the blue economy, as narrowly defined to be those around our oceans and our waters. Well, a list of those economic sectors is here, about 11 sectors that you can identify based on those diagrams. And 1.5% of the Philippines' gross domestic product right now is officially contributed by fishery and aquaculture and water transportation. That seems small, but if you consider that there's so much more to the blue economy, as we have just pointed out, there's really scope for much larger contribution, especially if we were to value our natural capital right in our national income accounting, which we don't. Now, I won't dwell on that right now. We have a speaker later on, Dr. Ann de Los Angeles, who will talk to us about precisely accounting for the assets of our economy. The other infographic I'd like to show is coming from PEMC, which is Partnerships for the Environmental Management of the Seas of East Asia. And again, there's climate regulation, air, blue carbon, and so on. But I'd like to get to the bottom of the diagram, which simply says that if you really assess all of these, you actually are looking at anywhere from 3 to 19% of the gross domestic product. And this is established for at least 5 countries in the East Asian Seas region. Now, in the blue economy, some of our shared concerns consist of, first, unsustainable exploitation of our living marine resources. There's also the degradation of our mangroves, our beach forests, our seagrass and coral reefs. And there's also pollution from plastics and now the microplastics that come out of that, sewage and marine debris, and of course, all the harmful effects of all of these. And climate change, of course, leading to sea level rise and coastal erosion. And in fact, our coastal areas, usually our most rich economic production areas, are at risk simply because of sea level rise threatened by climate change. And now comes COVID-19, which many of us understand to be merely a manifestation of that bigger crisis of climate change. And how has it affected our blue economy? Well, fishers, especially coastal artisanal fishers, are traditionally among the poorest in this country. That is a poverty incidence of 26.2%. That was as of the last count in 2018. And this contrasts with the national average of 16.7%. So in short, there's really a much higher incidence of poverty among our fishing communities. And in the first semester of this year, the fishery sector shrank 0.9%, but more because of the first quarter contraction, actually. In fact, there was a very slight positive increase at the height of the lockdowns in the second quarter, which says something about the resilience of our agricultural and fishery sectors. But really, what affected fisheries all over the world was the closure of food service sectors, like the restaurants and the hotels and all the other food service industries, thereby severely impacting on the value chains of fisheries. And so a lot of the production also had to be disrupted because the food could not be moved. At the same time, passenger shipping obviously went on a standstill at least in the Philippines. And on the other hand, maritime cargo shipping turns out to have continued. And I was just discussing this with a company that actually provides the personnel for the maritime cargo ships. And they attested that business as usual actually had been going on. But in short, there had been severe disruptions in some, especially probably most of the economic activities associated with the blue economy. But I'd like to end this overview by pointing out that it's not hard to see that a country like ours, split up into thousands of islands, requires a different approach to development than one with a largely contiguous land area like our neighbor Thailand. And so I've constantly challenged ourselves as the country's former economic planning secretary to take an archipelagic view of overall development planning against the traditional tendency for a dominantly land-based planning perspective. In other words, I'd like to conclude by saying it's time we got away from our traditional overly land-focused planning and begin to plan and act like the man we really are. That is a maritime and archipelagic nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shiel. Okay, we will have our chance to ask questions through the chat box later, and we have our main reactors. But for now, I'd like to call on our special guest speaker from Stanford University. Her expertise is natural capital and a field that sounds new to me, biogeography. She's a Stanford professor in biology and director of the Center for Conservation Biology, senior fellow of Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment, and director and founder of Stanford's Natural Capital Project, which is also in partnership with other organizations outside the US, including China's Academy of Science. Current interest, land use, biodiversity dynamics, ecosystem services. She has produced a lot of publications, and I thought of showing you this because this is of great interest to us. Using gross ecosystem product, maybe a substitute or in addition to GNP, GEP, to value nature in decision making. She works with both public and private policy and decision makers and advises several countries. I think she has won all potential awards that one can win globally. SOFI, Volvo Environment, Blue Planet, and the latest one is considered as the Nobel Prize in the environment field, Tyler Prize 2020. I'm very pleased to present to you Dr. Gretchen Daily. We have one thing in common. Our teacher in Economics 101 was Kenneth Arrow, but we are generations apart. We graduated same year, I learned, but she from college and I from graduate school. Welcome to the Philippines, even just via Zoom, Gretchen.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm good afternoon to everybody. I'm so grateful for the chance to, sorry, I'm being distracted a bit. I'm so grateful for the chance to meet with all of you. I should say that my heart and my work is really focused on the prayer that we started out with and on the spirit of this gathering, which is to share knowledge and understanding and capacity and really a commitment in driving toward a sustainable blue economy. And I'm extremely impressed and excited and inspired by what you're leading, and very, very grateful to learn from you and make a small contribution to the webinar. So let me dive in. I'll try to share my slides now. Let's see. Please let me know if this is working. Do you now see my slides in the full screen?
Yes.
we do.
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, building on what Dr. Cora, Claudio, and Dr. Habito and others have put forth, what I'd like to dive into is mostly the experience around the world in driving toward and actually achieving a sustainable blue economy, as you were putting it. And it's actually a very challenging moment for all of us. I can certainly say here in California and in the United States, as I'm sure you're aware, we have many layers of challenges, including obviously the pandemic and our country's poor handling of it. We also have extreme climate impacts, the fires and extreme temperatures that we're experiencing in California and likely to see intensifying in the future, and many other challenges. But at the same time, I have to say that I've never been more hopeful of coming together to deliver on the promise that you opened up with. And so what many are coming to realize in a great awakening around the world today is that nature really can be seen as the engine of prosperity for the 21st century and can be integrated in a very meaningful way into our economic planning, into our policy and financial mechanisms for guiding investments and for guiding development to achieve human well-being in a deep and lasting way. So that's what I'll get into now. First, it's what is natural capital? If we're going to change our economic system, we need to consider the framing that we use so widely in guiding investments in physical or built capital and human capital, our knowledge and skills, to some degree in social capital around the world, a really important, though sometimes neglected part. And then natural capital, we're really awakening to now. And it's basically Earth's lands, waters, and the biodiversity, kind of the machinery of nature that makes our existence on this beautiful blue planet possible. We could think about an alternative being on the moon or on a sterile planet. There would be nothing to support human well-being. Every aspect virtually of the well-being of humanity hinges on the complex systems of life in the thin layer called the biosphere that surrounds the Earth. And the natural capital, the lands, waters, and the biodiversity is being rapidly depleted, as we all know, from this thin layer of life that miraculously keeps us all going. And that depletion, on the one hand, is becoming scary. We're losing more than at any time in human history, and are projected to lose up to 50% or more of the different animals, plants, fish, microorganisms that live with us, even just in our lifetimes, really. But that scarcity is partly what's waking people up and conferring value in the economic and globalized system in which we're all operating today. So it then asks, opens the question, well, what are the values of natural capital and how can we incorporate them in a meaningful way into decision making, into policy, finance, and management? And we can think, in the Philippines, we all have our connections to nature in different ways, appreciating many of the intangible benefits, and also the many tangible benefits of health, of nutrition coming from the nurseries along coastal margins with coral reefs, mangrove, seagrass beds, the fishing livelihoods that are supported, the tourism and other many livelihoods along coastlines. Similarly, in big cities like Manila, thinking of the values of nature and maintaining water quality or temperatures the cooling effect of having nature in big cities, helping to maintain air quality, reduce noise, maintain mental health. That's been discovered relatively recently as a massive benefit that nature brings to urban residents with much lower levels of mental disorders relating mostly to depression and anxiety in places where people have more access to nature. And we all feel that with the pandemic, this desperate need to get out and experience nature while we're confined for protection. And all of this is leading to an awakening that even this week, I'll touch on a few examples. But first off, like in the bigger picture, we're working the Natural Capital Project with partners all around the world, all across Asia through the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank across Latin America and the Caribbean, the World Bank across the world, and other scaling partners who are recognizing and investing in these natural capital approaches. Both ADB and IDB are launching natural capital labs that are meant to inform discussions with country leaders, finance ministers, and others, are meant to inform investments in development across countries. ADB helped us develop gross ecosystem product that I'll get to. With IDB, I'll show you some of our work today. And with the World Bank, we're developing a natural capital index that will be used across all countries to take stock and value the natural assets that countries have, their natural capital, and look at the capacity for deploying those assets in a more efficient and a more effective and more sustainable way for advancing development objectives. So all of these major institutions and many others, I was going to say that just this week, each of these entities has come forth, McKinsey & Company, with a big report on natural capital worldwide. Swiss Re just announced an index for biodiversity and ecosystem services. Walmart has committed to massive investments in securing ocean resilience and biodiversity around the world. And the World Economic Forum has come out with many very strong position statements on the vital importance of investing in and securing natural capital for achieving all of our development objectives and security going forward. So I'm happy to share links on any of these things afterward, if you like. But what I'd like to dive into, just taking off from Dr. Cora's wonderful introduction, going back to a time when we were connected through a wonderful mentor and scholar working worldwide, Dr. Ken Arrow, who got the Nobel Prize in Economics and really helped lay a foundation, integrating ecology and other aspects of the biosphere into an economic framework. And then by the middle of the 1990s, there were many pioneering cases, such as of Costa Rica, in committing to, in this case, it was a payment system, paying landholders for forest left standing for its climate security benefits, its hydropower and drinking water and irrigation benefits, its pharmaceutical benefits, and finally its tourism benefits. Costa Rica continues to be a pioneer in this arena. New York City also came forth with a pioneering case where upstream farmers, such as this gentleman shown on the left with a dairy farm, are being paid by downstream residents of the city to change their practices. And in his case, he started using that solar heated tent that you can see provided by the city, and fenced also his dairy cows away from streams. And all of that improved the health of the cows compared to the old style barns and the way they used to run around across the land. And at the same time, greatly reduced health risks of different diseases like cryptosporidium and giardia that threatened the 10 million people working and living in the city. So with those pioneering cases, we then came to a new phase of trying to systematize a universal approach. There have basically been hundreds of pioneering cases, and now we're trying to systematize them and scale them up. So the Natural Capital Project came along, a partnership working with many major institutions, including, as Dr. Cora mentioned, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, those various development banks, the organization, the Academy in Sweden that gives the Nobel Prize, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and many others internationally, about 250 research partners, and mostly scaling and implementing partners. And the name of the game here really is to reach out across the world and across our many little areas of expertise to come together and try and accelerate development of the kind of sustainable approaches for moving to sort of a green or a blue economy and financial system. So I'm going to give you some examples. The idea is to integrate new science on the value of nature and technology, bringing in data streams that we never imagined having before, that would allow us to very efficiently and effectively target interventions through partnerships all over the world. And we work directly in about 60 countries, many of them coastal and island nations like the Philippines, to drive impact in policy, finance, and management. And what we've developed together with contributions from well over 1,000 scientists worldwide is a way of valuing nature that's actionable and that's immediately relevant for decision making. And so this basically development of a platform really for looking at the values of nature for coastal protection or climate security, clean water supply, health, energy, urban cooling, and so on. All of that is now available for free, and it's accessible. It's being used by the United Nations, the equivalent of the IPCC, but the IPBES for biodiversity and ecosystem services. And it's available and being used now in 185 countries worldwide to help guide development planning and smart investments in nature to achieve development. I'll just show you some examples, 3 brief examples, basically in Latin America and the Caribbean, and then in China, for how we would use this to mainstream the values of natural capital into these different types of demonstrations in development planning across countries, in livable cities, in order to secure coastal climate resilience, fresh water, and advance standards, especially across the private sector, from which we really need to catalyze more investment. So here, briefly, I'll say that all across Latin America, there's been major advances in demonstrating investments in water security for cities by recognizing the many downstream water users on the right, just cities themselves and industry, residents drinking water, irrigators in the big valleys that cities have often grown up in, hydropower facilities, often the water coming from far away, from places where people don't even speak the same language. So this is a Quechua speaking gentleman living in the highlands and supplying water to many downstream cities in Colombia. And now the cities have developed a governance mechanism where there's a secretariat in many cities now across Latin America that pools investments by the different sectors shown on the right and guides those investments in specific places in the upper watersheds where the impact will be greatest to secure downstream water quality, timing of flow, so you reduce flood risk, and you also reduce the risk of water scarcity. And so this is now being scaled across Latin America with over 50 different funds for water security, shown in different stages of development here with these little circles in the major capital cities and other very large cities in Latin America. And now this is also being adapted and adopted across much of Asia and starting to take off in Africa as well. Let me give you another example. Going to coastal systems, there's, as you well know, been really dramatic and tragic intensification of hurricanes all across the Caribbean and other parts of the world. Here just showing for parts of the Caribbean and places where we've worked intimately, escalating damages that can, you know, it's really a lower bound estimate of the damages in these dollar terms when you think about the impact on people's lives, their feeling of security and recovery from these intensifying storms, and also sea level rise. So there's a lot of planning going on now around coastal climate resilience. And here just shows one of our tools that lets you map out the hazard that different places face. Here, the Bahamas, the hazard index shown in the bottom right. And you can see, you can click on things with or without sea level rise, and with or without habitats, with or without nature, they're helping to protect communities and property from damage. And using this kind of analysis, we can see where to invest. Just for that same island, Andros Island, note the shape of the island, and you can see it here with the satellite image on the left that gives us a ton of information on both the land and the marine natural capital, shows where the risks are, and then helps inform decisions to protect these places, to invest in both nature and also some built infrastructure to secure people in the future. We're using the same approach and have developed it across Belize, another coastal country with a lot of coral reef and these different development zones. And they invited us to contribute to their coastal zone planning with their coastal zone management authority. And we worked across the country looking at the dependence of people in the top part on mangroves shown on the bottom left and coral reefs on the bottom right for many aspects of their livelihoods: coastal climate protection, lobster and other fisheries, tourism. There's also a lot of onshore, you know, development supporting tourism and the economy, a lot of shipping and offshore oil and gas development. So there were many sectors involved in this planning. And we evaluated how to develop the coastline under different scenarios, looking at recreation and tourism, fisheries, where the habitat is, all the different activities over a 20-year planning horizon across many sectors. And then came up with you know, values of natural capital under these different scenarios. I'm not going to go into detail. This just gives you an idea of how representatives and leaders in different sectors of the government and in the private sector can come together and visualize different types of plans, different scenarios, and then work together to come to agreement as to where to make investments, how to value the natural capital for these different types of benefits to different sectors. And this yielded a plan in 2016 that was agreed to by the government and about 7 different sectors, from oil and gas and shipping and transportation and tourism, fishing, and so on, And this plan, because it was advanced in a way that could lead to much more sustainable development, promoting wise planned use of Belize's coastal resources, was endorsed by the Inter-American Development Bank and is being financed by it in 2 phases of 5-year plans. It's a 20-year plan, but the bank is committing to invest in it as the development takes place, and there's constant sort of revision and attention to the natural capital part. And this is now being scaled across IDB's 26 member countries, this approach. I'm going to give you another example now, and this will be my last one, going to China. So we're seeing how across Latin America, in the context of water security for cities, in the Caribbean and other coastal countries, in the context of climate resilience and sustainable development. And now in China, we're seeing scalable approaches to, achieving this dream. And in China, there have been dramatic changes in government really to support integrating an ecological perspective into planning. So just a few years ago, China added as a 5th pillar of national development into its constitution an ecological focus. And the idea involves a few things that all countries could do. The first is develop a system for accounting for natural capital that a country has. And through the platform that the Natural Capital Project has developed, China advanced this accounting of all of its major benefits coming from natural capital across the country. So for food production, for carbon sequestration and climate resilience, for retaining productive soils and food security, for preventing sandstorms and maintaining air quality in cities. And there you're looking at Inner Mongolia in the upper right, where there's a lot of overgrazing, and where more sustainable grazing would reduce the likelihood and transport of sand and dust. That's the kind of thing to be thinking about. And water retention on the bottom left, it's really securing downstream places through forests and then also wetlands from flooding, and maintaining a good flow of water throughout the year. When the monsoonal rains come for, say, 3 months a year, you really want for irrigation, for drinking water, for hydropower. You want that water to be retained by forests and distributed throughout the year to keep those benefits going. And then biodiversity is also a core goal. And then with that mapping that now any country could do, and that's what we're doing for the World Bank and IDB and so on, you can look at what the importance is of different habitat types, different natural capital stocks for providing different ecosystem benefits. And then here's just some of the detail. This can be done at a very fine level of detail, basically for all countries now. In the country, they discovered that actually their investments were paying off. And in most aspects of natural capital, there were improvements over the past, from the years 2000 to 2010. But in the same time period, biodiversity was still in decline. That's not very surprising. It takes a while to bend the curve on biodiversity decline. So the country is now investing in one of the most, I think the most comprehensive national park and nature reserve system in the world. And they're also zoning land. So that's sort of the second step, is figuring out where the natural capital is, what its values are, who benefits from the existence of an investment in natural capital, and then how to zone the land. So in China, 49% of the land is now zoned for natural capital. And in any place you go, you can see there are basically 4 zones: the natural capital is being protected mostly in the steep areas. Then there's the other 3 zones are for agriculture, for urban settlement, and for industry. And presently, the third part of this is to guide investments. So presently, 200 million people are being paid to restore natural capital in China. And there's a lot of attention to livelihoods and discussion and survey of people's livelihoods and whether these policies, the finance mechanisms, and their implementation are really helping people, especially elderly people in China's western, the vast reaches where there's more concern over poverty alleviation and human well-being. And finally, and just to draw to a close, the idea is to link the downstream beneficiaries in the big modern cities with the inland reaches like the upper Yangtze River Basin, where land use practices of many people affect the flood risk and many other benefits that flow downstream and downwind. And so there is a lot of attention to urban investments that I'm not really getting into now, but are a big part of the whole approach. And China's major cities are investing heavily in this approach and in greening the cities to achieve improvement in livability and sustainability. So finally, I'll just touch on GEP as part of this dream of moving to an ecological civilization for the 21st century. The idea was to come up with another metric besides GDP to guide that transformation. And GDP is basically blind to natural capital and has it helped guide 20th century growth models, but we really need something different now. And the idea is just with GDP, you're looking at all the goods, all the services that come from a complex economy and multiplying those goods and services by their price and summing it all up. And the idea with GEP is very parallel, to look at all the goods and services coming from nature and to estimate their value, whether just the number of people affected, or here we're really trying to monetize and estimate in monetary terms what those values are for society. And that involves bringing in the data that I mentioned that we now have available for free globally, and running the data through that software system to look at the provision of different goods and services to people, and then report basically 3 things: the contribution of ecosystems to the economy and society, and then what kind of financial compensation makes sense from cities to regions with nature and the people, the stewards of that natural capital, to help enhance and secure it. And then finally, just to evaluate performance over time of the policies, the leaders, and these investments. So China's going all out with GEP. It's being piloted at every scale, the national scale down to tiny villages, and across major cities like Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Beijing, and others. And it's a really interesting model that the UN is looking at, scaling worldwide, and many countries where we work in Latin America are also testing out GEP. So it's something that definitely could be scalable, and another advance for all of us to consider as we reach together for an ecological civilization. So I want to thank you finally here for all the inspiration, for letting me join in this wonderful webinar and occasion. And I'll turn back over to Dr. Cora Claudio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Daly. We have 2 main reactors, but we're welcoming questions that you can post in the Q&A, And we will try to answer them now, but if we cannot, then we will have them answered after. So we have from the business community, my friend of many years, but he's older than me. We call him Rico. That's nickname for his surname. So he is now the chair emeritus of one very productive and leading industry in this blue economy, the seaweed industry. He's the founding president, and now he's the chair emeritus. He has also his own company that is dealing with seaweed. Several companies, I think, no? MCPI is the bigger one. He's a CPA. I thought he's an engineer because we came from an engineering school. And so he will be representing the business sector's point of view here. And our other main reactor is from the legislative arm of our government, from Congress, Honorable Kiko Benitez. He represents the 3rd District of Negros Occidental, Vice Chair of the House Committee on Housing and Urban Development and House Committee on Agriculture and Food, and also member of several other committees, including the Committee on SDGs, former president of the Philippine Women's University, and also taught in the U.S. University of Washington in Seattle. He earned his MA and PhD from the University of Wisconsin, and from Cornell University, his BA. So take it away, guys. And those who want to ask questions, we will look at, please post them in the Q&A so that the other one will be for administrative matters, the chat. Okay.
Who would you like to ask first, Dr. Cora?
Any one of you? You can go ahead.
Can I start if that's okay?
Yes.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Professor Gretchen,
Yes.
Yes.
Professor Daly, Dr.
Thank you.
Shell, okay lang. So thank you very much for both of you presenting such actually rather inspiring and if we can abide and follow it through, rather game-changing insights, no, into the government. As has already been mentioned, I'm a sitting member of the Republic's legislature, so I guess some of my questions will come from that point of view. I was particularly struck by Dr. Habito's demand that we, and I've heard say this before in the Committee on Economic Affairs, that we really should start thinking in terms of us being an archipelago, and that we should man up, I suppose, as he would say. No, what intrigued me is the idea that manning up, in this case, actually means thinking more importantly of networks and flows, really using the metaphor of water to connect the archipelagic nature of the Philippines. But that this also ties in to what Dr. Daly has been saying in terms of upstream and downstream holistic planning and so on. I guess part of my question, and either one of you can respond. Structurally, you had mentioned, for example, the dairy cows of upstate New York being paid to by downstream New Yorkers to create the kind of well-being that is common for both, right? I guess I was wondering what kind of structural programs that entailed and that required. Was that something done by government? Was government the one that created those flows of funding and programs, or was this something that emerged organically from below, so to speak, right? Because I guess part of what I'm getting from Dr. Daly's presentation is the intricate balance of having something coming up below organically as a kind of social movement and increase in awareness with interventions that come from management from the top, particularly from the state. Our conditions obviously are not the same as China's, right? As Dr. Habito would let you know, our planning horizons tend to be very, very, very short, with dire consequence for things like natural ecosystems that take much longer than political terms, right, to rehabilitate themselves. So a certain question of balancing those two things from below versus from the top, given the specificity of our own political systems and its deficiencies, right, might be required. So I was wondering if, number one, Dr. Daly could give us a little bit more sense of how that was done in New York State, how that was done in Belize, for example, in terms of the use of water security planning, which obviously involves more than just the archipelagic nature, right? It involves the water flows from watersheds all the way into the oceans. And then specific to Dr. Habito, what do you think, sir, Congress can still do in the last year and a half or so or 2 years, I suppose, that we have left? You know, what would be doable within the remaining term of both President Duterte and the current 18th Congress that will end in June 2022? Because as you know, there has been a land use act that's been pending in Congress for, I don't know, generations now, that hasn't been passed. Is this something that, for example, the Committee on Housing could pass a natural ecosystem zone and mandate it as part of CLUP? Is that another way that might be possible for interventions from the legislature? So 2 sets of separate questions, sir, and I will then listen patiently to your responses. And I guess either one of you can start. Thank you.
I'll
Okay.
let you go ahead first if you wish.
Oh, please go ahead. The first question was for you, Dr. Daly. So,
Okay.
the PES systems.
Thank you. That is a really good question. And you've really put your finger on a key issue. You know, how do these approaches originate? How do you cultivate the awareness and the support that's really necessary from below? For most of the world, yeah, you can't expect a state imposition of this sort of thing to be successful, especially coming out of the blue. And so actually in the New York case, there's a long history that goes back to the founding of the city, in fact. And I've written a chapter on it. I would be happy to try and get an electronic version of that little chapter and
Yes,
circulate
please.
it to you if you're interested, because it goes way back. In Europe too, you know, it goes back to about the 1600s in France. So where there were earlier times where people understood much more in their bones the connection between land use, agricultural practices, development practices in watersheds, and water quality that would be experienced by people consuming the water downstream. But it took a long time. It took a lot of fighting on the part of a variety of NGOs. It was very much a bottom-up movement. And then eventually some people partnered with all of these NGOs. So some people that were operating in the city government, and together they were wondering, you know, where to get the money for one thing to do this. It was estimated, I guess what happened was we have in the US a Clean Water Act that goes back to about 1970. And New York's water was getting very close to being declared unsafe for drinking. And there had been terrible outbreaks of disease in a bunch of other cities in the US. And that made the city very worried that they would need to build a filtration plant that would cost between $6 and $8 billion to serve New York. And they had a pretty accurate estimate of that cost because they had been required to build a filtration plant for about 10% of their water supply. But now the 90% was at risk that comes from this farther away watershed, about 100 to 150 miles north of the city. And when that big price tag came up, that's kind of what motivated people to come together, and the city floated an environmental bond issue. And it was estimated that it would cost only $1 to $1.5 billion to take a natural capital approach, as compared to the $6 to $8 billion in building a treatment plant. And it was basically
So
then
sorry,
a win-win-win.
could you explain that a little bit more? Because we also have a Clean Water Act that's not being properly implemented, and
Okay.
there's a huge waste and water treatment issue here as well.
Well, the U.S. Yeah, the U.S. does have many, many cities. We hear about Flint, Michigan as an iconic example, with
Lead.
terrible water that is very dangerous to drink and does not meet the Clean Water Act. So implementation of the act really also often depends on local pressure by NGOs and kind of bottom-up pressure. So this balance
So
and
it's
interplay.
it's a city tax that goes back to the dairy farmers? Is it what's the
Actually,
mechanism?
what made it work was the city floated a bond issue. So
Okay.
various people kind of invested in that, and then they used that money to ask for volunteers upstream. And there were several types of participants. Some were the farmers that I showed you, some were foresters, and some were actually towns up there that were developing and using, very old sewage systems, or so same thing, like sewage in the water. And another problem was in the 1980s, there was a big development boom, and all these homes got built up there, kind of third homes for wealthy people, with no attention to protecting stream sides. So they would have a lawn going right down to the stream, little things like that, but that really severely degraded water quality, affecting the health of 10 million people living and working in the city. So it was a struggle, and it took more than 10 years, and there was a lot of fighting. And the outcome, though, is there are two things worth mentioning, and then I'll turn over back to you. But the outcome was, first of all, a lot of people did worry. They'd seen these outbreaks of disease, and who wanted to get that? Hundreds of people were getting terrible illness of Cryptosporidium and Giardia. Some people were dying. And then second, they could see a triple win, that they could get water at the lowest cost safely by investing in natural capital, which is what the city had done throughout its whole history, and only recently had kind of departed from that knowledge and tradition. And third, there was a third win, which is if you cared about anything besides, just water at the lowest cost, you were protecting all these other benefits up in the Catskills. Would you rather spend a romantic weekend in a civil engineering filtration plant, or up in the beautiful Catskills? There are so many intangible cultural and other benefits of tourism and things. So people went for it. And now in scaling across Latin America, for example, there's a huge educational component. So many schools teach the connection between upland regions and forest and downstream water security. So there's a huge cultural and educational and social component. It ties in Colombia with the peace process. There are many other dimensions to it that are necessary to make it work. So it would be an oversimplification to say you can just replicate this anywhere. But on the other hand, there is a growing movement, and people look to other cities and they see that Quito and many others, capital cities, have taken the approach. and they're much more willing to adopt it and try it than they were before. So there is an acceleration. But you've put your finger on exactly that balance that needs to be promoted each place somewhat differently. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Habito, sorry.
Yeah, the one legislative measure I would mention would be that so-called PINRA bill, or the Philippine Economic, Environmental, and Natural Resource Accounting measure. Because as a lot of people say, you cannot manage what you can't measure. And the very first step towards recognizing the importance of our blue economy, and that means, of course, the whole ecosystem, is to be able to account for the values and the wealth that we have. And so I understand there is a bill pending in Congress right now, and I would urge our legislators to take that seriously. Unfortunately, I know it's up against the difficult obstacle that traditionally there's a tendency to downplay data gathering and statistics as a low priority activity. People seem not to appreciate enough the need for data and statistics, especially when we now really have to have evidence-based policy making. And so, anyway, to cut my statement short.
Will be presented.
One last question before I let go, if that's okay. My third last question. Dr. Daly, it seems to me that part of the problems that we've been having in the past, and it was mentioned in your presentation, was really a model of industrial expansion from the 20th century that did not take into any account the regenerative requirements of natural ecosystems, which are not, on the other hand, based upon a constant, almost exponential expansion forever, right? On a kind of scale of eternity. So how different is the natural capital that you are promoting, aside from simply understanding the value of ecosystems and the services that they provide? How is it transformative of the kind of industrial growth model that all of our macroeconomic systems, GDP, for example, to be specific, seems to be based upon? Given, for example, in our case, again, back to the issue of water, we don't have a tradition of thinking of nature as the commons, right? As a kind of commonweal, the way they might in Europe, right? So what would be your response for something like that? And then I really will, Dr. Cora, keep quiet.
You've put your finger on it again with the book Capital over your shoulder there. I would say that first off, we're at a point where we need to drive a deep cultural shift. And this step of recognizing natural capital in its many forms and many values is only a first step in awakening our societies and policymakers, whether in public or private sectors, to the urgent need to recognize these values. But the bigger transformation that we're all reaching for involves going back to the prayer we opened up with. It involves a much broader set of advances in policy, just coming up with, say, a new way of accounting without integrating the numbers that you're coming up with into decision making. That will be meaningless. So, just coming up with a price tag on nature alone won't do anything. So it is a necessary first step, but to go beyond that, we need real demonstrations of policies and finance mechanisms that function across many types of societies worldwide. And that's where I could also recommend a few short readings if you like afterward. But basically, there's been a huge push to demonstrate these approaches in all sorts of contexts. So with the development banks in part, but also with many country governments at different levels, whether like in a province or even just a county level or at a city level, we've been trying to discover the most effective ways of activating people in their decision making to deliver workable demonstrations that will inspire confidence and help drive this broader cultural shift as they can be replicated and scaled up. So there are, I would say, some thousands of approaches like the ones I described in operation today worldwide. And that's the inspiring part. And that's really happened over the past 15 years or so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Daly. Yes, I would love to have the readings.
Congressman Kiko. I'd like to take one question from Rico from the business sector in the blue economy, in the blue environment. And then there is a question that I'd like to raise from our Q&A from Scott, no? So you can have your question, Rico. If you are still thinking, I'll read Scott's question first. Try to figure that out in a while. Let me just ask this question from Scott. Addressed to Professor Daly. China's announced plans for rewilding of the biosphere and building of cities in China is not noteworthy and impressive. However, what about destructive Chinese activities around the world? No single country does more damage to the environment globally than China. For example, and he mentions here several examples. I will just read the first one. The majority of all overfishing on the high seas, 43% of the surface of the planet is China. The supermajority of demand for megafauna ivory is also China, etc. So the question is, I guess, what will be left in 10, 20, 30 years if the rest of the world, if China continues at its current rate of destructive economic activity and wildlife extraction for profit? I guess the scientists, they think differently from the ones running a country, you know. So how can we, in fact, we are thinking of having scientists, Lau, if you are already here, maybe you can explain if there is something going on when you have your part. I think we can explore having joint research projects so that we can help each other, maybe instead of quarreling, no? But what we are expecting is that activities within China's intention to be ecologically sound and be a leader in it must not only be within the Chinese land, but also around it, where it is impacting a lot of countries, including the Philippines now. What can we say about that, Professor?
Yeah,
Ben? Can
I feel. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're making an excellent point, and I appreciate you're bringing this up. And I should say, well, I sit here in the United States, that in many ways, if you account for the global impact of countries, there's no country than the United States with a greater responsibility for past and current impact. You know, with less than 5% of the global population, the US, I don't mean to turn away from China. I'm going to make the point that, number one, the US is responsible for most of the environmental destruction that we've experienced worldwide in its own development practices across the world and in its impacts on climate. And we're not a party to any of the major UN agreements, the Biodiversity Agreement, the Climate Convention, most of the UN conventions on the environment, the US has not ratified. So just to speak as a citizen of this country, it's not only a terrible shame, but it's a terrible risk for all countries to have these leaders, the superpowers, whether US or China, not playing a lead role in this. So what's going on in China today, you know, what was stated is absolutely correct. And whether China, the US, and other, you know, major forces in the world man up, as it was put at the beginning, remains to be seen. And it's a desperate challenge. And I think, you know, our best hope is to illuminate the selfish best interest of countries in maintaining the livability and sustainability of the biosphere. You know, no country is going to be able to survive on its own while the rest of this planet is nuked. We're going to see mass migrations. We're going to see pandemics that, you know, don't notice any borders. So I'm extremely concerned. I'm ashamed of our own country here, a lack of manning up. And I'm hopeful, though, that we can build capacity in countries worldwide to recognize. So when they're taking investments from China, for example, investments in hydropower and road development and mining, agriculture, all the other kinds of investments that are being made, whether through China or all the other development banks and countries, that countries have the capacity to recognize what the trade-offs are and to insist on better investments, smart investments that secure their future and not the typical investments of the past. So there's the two sides of it. Countries need to build kind of a resistance to the development schemes that are typically being promoted worldwide today.
Well, I think scientists must also try to be in politics. In this country, Professor Gretchen, we have allocated seats for civil society, the NGOs. And I think several of them are made of scientists, but well, the ones who ran, I'm not sure if they won this year in the last election. But I think we have to give importance to the communication part in this in this fight. This is another fight that we have to make. I'd like to call on Rico now. Rico.
Oh, thank you, Cora. Thank you, Dr. Claudio. Well, as you may see in my background, we are regreening the ocean. Meaning to say that we are planting seaweed back and growing them, and of course harvesting them in due course, in due time. What I'd like to ask our speakers are, do you think we can encourage people worldwide to somehow regrow plants that are in the ocean so that it would be useful for the environment as well as economically for people? Like here in the Philippines and Indonesia, we're growing a lot of seaweed, providing the world with gelatin, or not jelly, not gelatin, but jellies for their food and for their special products, even for medicinal use. So just like if you see my picture at the background, that's how we grow seaweed. It's green. If we regreen the reef areas in the country, both here in Southeast Asia, like Indonesia or Malaysia. And I think this is one way that we can improve our environment and make the world grow cleaner. So the question is, do we realize, or does people realize that while we have been getting the benefits of the resources from the ocean, how are we in teaching our citizens to be able to help clean our water that's flowing down, or the waste that's going down to the oceans, so that the resources that we get from the ocean would continue to be sustainable and useful for people in a way that it would be clean and healthy for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rico.
Maybe the question is so.
Any comment from Professor Gretchen or Shiel or even Congressman Kiko? How can we, I guess the question is, how can we encourage even the common tao to help in producing, nurturing and producing plants like this that sometimes I think plants and our marine biodiversity, we assume that they are limitless, that they will always be there. So we just keep on harvesting, but we are not regrowing or just not even allowing them to grow on their own. Anybody who wants to comment on that?
Well, the seaweed industry in the Philippines has been a major contributor indeed to exports, especially. I've actually visited a lot of these seaweed farms in Tawi-Tawi and other parts.
Thank you.
I could see the tremendous contribution they're making. And indeed, these are now actually farmed, not just really just harvested from the sea, but they're actually being farmed effectively and sustainably, I think.
That's true.
So indeed, it is worth encouraging, especially because we have such a long coastline. I mean, we have one of the longest coastlines in the world. And this is one very viable economic activity that can be promoted. And it helps the ecosystem, the coastal ecosystem, even as we derive economic value from it.
Well, we are helping them. Our committee started a project in San Jose Occidental, Mindoro about 3 years ago. And we were able to help increase their income by 8 times, not 8%, 8 times, by the simple move of asking the DOH to DOST to help us give them a very simple solar dryer because their type of drying is something that uses bamboo, and every time there is a typhoon, the dryer disappears, because it's just a platform. Professor Gretchen, I think you wanted to say something.
I love, you know more about this than I do, but this kind of example is exactly what we need to find ways of replicating and promoting, perhaps through, you were mentioning, private industry. Is there an economic model that would make this replicable and scalable? And that, I feel, is a key frontier. And if the Philippines can figure out how to go far with this, that would be a tremendous benefit, not only for the Philippines, but for many other places. I agree with you. And we need more forums like this one to share experience and invite in the investors and private sector entities who might run with these kinds of ideas. Thank you for that inspiring example.
Thank you, Professor. That's what we do.
Are there more questions? We have a comment from our leading, one of the top urban planners in the world, architect June Palafox, who was president of MAP before. He finds the discussion great and insightful, and what he wants is that those who are processing projects like urban parks, open spaces, etc. Or those who are in urban development, real estate development, should not just be too profit-oriented, but really allocate areas for urban parks and open spaces, which are the lungs of the city, so that there won't only be saleable building properties, but also things that will help that these developers should consider impacts on nature, people, not just profit and increase in real estate taxes. In fact, June, there is, Congressman Kiko, I understand that there is a legislative measure that penalizes you or taxes you if you plant a tree. Because it increases the value of your property, and so you have to pay a little bit more in real estate tax. So that is really a disincentive, and I think those are things that we really should do something about. Are there any more questions? If none, we would like to move to our other. We allowed to be a little bit late because we have our special guest, but we have other things to discuss. And so I'd like to go now to the next batch of presentations, starting with the partnership of the current director of the UP Marine Science Institute, Dr. Lau David, who is a Towns Awardee, and Dr. Rodora Asanza, who is president of the National Academy of Science and Technology. I won't read anymore because we don't want to be so late. Anyway, we will provide these bios together with PowerPoints, and I hope, Professor Gretchen, we can also have a copy of your PowerPoint if it is possible, or some papers that you might have that will help us understand this National Capital Project more. So I'd like to call on Dr. Lau now, who is the first physical oceanographer, correct, Lau, in the Philippines, and a Towns Awardee. We have an award here for women, the Outstanding Women in the Nation Service. Lau got it in her field. Also, our inspirational speaker at the end, Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda, also is a Towns Awardee. I'm also a Towns Awardee. Okay, Lau, take it away.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and can you see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon to everybody. Like Dr. Cora mentioned, this is a talk that was developed by both myself and Professor Asanza, Academician Asanza, who is the president of the National Academy of Science and Technology. NAST is currently pushing for blue economy in the Philippines, and Professor Asanza is a huge advocate of this. So like Dr. Cora mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different definitions of blue economy, and I just wanted to say that in the context of this talk and what we are pushing for, blue economy is the sustainable use of ocean resources, both to improve the economic growth as well as livelihoods, jobs, and the ocean ecosystem health. In terms of the Philippines, this is enumeration of the different industries that is associated with the Philippine blue economy, arranged in the order of contribution to blue economy. And I will go through each one and show either challenges that are currently occurring in these industries or potential increase or improvement of these industries. So for tourism, we know that a lot of the tourists, both foreign and local, go to our countrysides to enjoy our beaches, islands, and diving spots. And currently, this industry is contributing about 12.7% of our GDP, according to the 2019 statistics, with employment estimated at 5.71 million people. But I think this is actually a lower potential. No? We can actually increase this even more with making use of biodiversity as our main attractant to the Philippines. For most people know that we are part of the Coral Triangle. I don't think a lot of people know that we actually have 1,000 more different species of fish than the Australian Great Barrier Reef. And we have about 100 more hard coral species than the Australian Great Barrier Reef. And yet most people would go to Australia to dive instead of the Philippines. So there's still a lot more that we can improve on. There are actually a lot of diving tourists that go specifically to look at specific fish or corals that they've never seen before. On top of this, I would like to show push your attention towards the figure on the right. This is a product of a study of Dr. Lemuel Aragones of UP Diliman, and shown here are the different cetaceans or dolphins, dolphins and whales that can be found in the Philippines. So this particular figure is for delphinids, and as you can see, facing the West Philippine Sea, you see my arrow, facing the West Philippine Sea, you have a lot of species that are on this side, and that there's actually a huge tourism specifically to visit areas where you can be assured to sight dolphins. And here in the Philippines, we only do that in a small portion of area in the middle of the Visayan Seas, and yet there's a lot more areas facing the West Philippine Sea. So that's one thing. With respect to fisheries and aquaculture, just like what Professor Shell mentioned, fisheries is actually contributing about 1.5 to 1.7% of our GDP and employing about 1.6 million people, as well as feeding each and every Filipino about 40 kilograms of protein every year. If you take a look at the map, it highlights the amounts in metric tons of fish that can actually be harvested in the West Philippine Sea. This is 129,000 metric tons. But the challenge here is what was mentioned by one of the, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was by Congressman Kiko or somebody else, but about what China is now currently doing in the Spratlys Island, which is here. If you take a look at the table that I have down here, you see that the number of species used to be in the 200s in the 1993, and it will go up and down through the years, but currently it's quite low, and more importantly, the number of families or the bigger groups of species, number of families has gone down to 22. This means that they have been affected by something in the environment. And what has changed between this last 3 decades is climate change is one, and the other one is all the construction that is now being done in those areas, mostly by the Chinese government. So we are at risk of losing this great resource if we do not do something to protect that. Coastal industry in the Philippines includes iron and steel works, oil refineries, cement works, chemical plants, meat and fish processing plants, power stations, pulp and paper mills. And it employs around 300,000 people in total and contributes about 4.7% of the GDP. And I think there's a lot more potential, just like what Professor Shell was saying. We have the 5th largest coastline in the world, and so there's a lot of space that can be used by a lot of users, including these coastal industries. But what we have to take a look at, and I would just like to bring attention to this to Congressman Kiko, is that we have our current law states that we have to be 3 meters, 10 meters, or 40 meters from the high tide level when we do any development, depending if it's urban to forested. But actually, that's not scientific. There's no scientific basis for that. Scientific basis would be height from high tide. And as you can see in the table on the left, these are the modeled maximum storm surge in these areas. So there's a paper that came out, top 10 is from Samar to Bataan. Two of these are facing the West Philippine Sea, Palawan and Bataan. So if you were an industry, you're supposed to build beyond this model storm surge. So it doesn't matter if it's 3 meters from the coast, 40 meters from the coast, or 100 meters from the coast. What is important is it's 5 meters above high tide sea level, or 7 meters above, or 8 meters above. So here in this picture, we see that a lot of the critical facilities, so all your industries, your hospitals, your schools, they should be located above that predicted storm surge line. Anything below that are things that may be destroyed. So if you really want to protect an investment that you're going to put, then you want it to last 50, 100 years, you have to take a look at the possible maximum storm surge. Ports and shipping. I'm very glad to say that we are now currently the 5th world's largest shipbuilding country after China, Japan, Korea, and Brazil. We have about 121 licensed shipyards. This is as of 2012, with about 7,000 employees. But of course, this also included some I won't mention the name anymore, but some shipbuilding facilities that have closed recently. So we have to put something in place to bring this back up, because otherwise we'd be losing this. In addition to this growing industry, we also have to take a look again, Congressman Kiko, you were asking, we have to finally declare our archipelagic sea lanes. Right now, on the right, you see the international sea lanes that are usually being taken as route around the Philippines, and you don't see anything that's actually passing inside. Right now, the ships can pass through without declaring where they're going. And if we declare archipelagic sea lanes, it will restrict them to only go through that. That's both, one, to protect the environment because of possible oil spills or grounding, but also you can enhance trade in the areas where they will pass through, because you can actually have ports along those areas to either refuel, get repairs, and so on, or even do an import-export in those ports. So it's very important to find that we should finally pass our archipelagic sea lane law. In terms of energy, and both oil and mining, and also renewables, we used to have quite a huge percentage of our electricity was renewable. Right now, we have 43% of our national energy mix coming from coal-fired thermal plants. We do have an available proven gas reserve of 3.48 trillion cubic feet, which is about equivalent to 31 times our annual consumption. So we have enough reserve for 31 years. And this is important because the global resource is limited as well. There is actually an estimate by some groups that the current gas reserve will only last about 65 years more, and the coal will last about 109 more years. So it's also important that we take advantage of the technology. It's no longer emerging, it's actually established technology of ocean renewables. There's all over the world, there's a lot of countries that are now trying this. Professor Daly mentioned Costa Rica. Costa Rica is now 100% renewable, which is a mix of their ocean and wind energy and solar. Orkney in UK is 100% renewable, mostly from ocean energy. And the estimate is within Southeast Asia, including the Philippines and the West Philippine Sea, there's about 1,000 sites that can actually generate 200 megawatts each. So this is one advantage. Professor Shell was saying, is being an archipelago actually a disadvantage? In this case, no, it's actually a good advantage. because when you have water rushing in from the Pacific going through the in-between islands, you actually make the water rush through because you constrict where they're going through. And in that rush, you can actually harness those energy. And it would be really nice to have, again, bills that will support endeavors to go into ocean renewable energy. And then there is medicines from the sea. Right now, we do have several patents that are natural products derived from the ocean and now being tried by pharmaceuticals here and abroad. But there's a lot more. For example, this work by Dr. Giselle Concepcion actually showed that in one of their big projects, they have already seen 820 mollusk specimens. So all of our patents in medicine from the sea is from mollusks mostly. And that 44 of the mollusks have been screened for bioactivity. No? In addition, there's about almost 4,000 total bacteria strains isolated. And all of this have medicinal potential. Specifically in the West Philippine Sea, we also have seen a seaweed called Griffitia species. These are known to produce grifticin, which is an anti-HIV compound. So it would be really good to keep this alive and well so we can do more research and produce medicines from these resources. And finally, there is a potential for other marine technology. And I always use Orkney in UK as an example because they are also a small island running now on about 110% renewable energy, mostly from the ocean. And what they did was made themselves into a testing site. So other nationalities would come to their area to test their technology. And then they would harness those while they're being tested. So they didn't invest in it, needed to invest in everything. Other countries invested in those technologies and tested it there. Now, if there's already an Orkney, why would we need one in the Philippines? Because the sea state in Orkney is quite different. It has higher energy, but less biodiversity. And those are very important because the Philippines has lower energy, but a lot of the tropical areas have low energy. So there's a need for a testing site such as that. But at the same time, high biodiversity. And this is important because there's the major impact of biodiversity in technology is the biofouling. So if you have an area that will easily biofoul or put barnacles and other growth on your marine technology, if you can test that here, how to make sure that they're not biofoul, then that will have a huge global impact. But all of this that I'm talking about are mostly just the industries. And as Professor Daly said earlier, this is just the tip of the iceberg because there's so much other things, ecosystem services that you derive from the environment. So there's nutrient cycling, climate regulation, flood regulation, and then there's the cultural aspect of spirituality, education, recreation, and so much more. So all of these also need to be taken into consideration when we're valuing our resources, not just what we can derive from it from the industry point of view, which is still a huge potential for the Philippines, but also all these other constituents which contribute to human well-being. So as an ending slide, what would be needed to have a blue economy framework institutionalized in the Philippines? First of all, just like the previous speakers have said, we need to value. We need to do a valuation of our natural capital, specifically our marine ecosystems and services and goods, so all of its functions. And then we have to reinvest portions of the benefits from this blue economy to ensure the resiliency. So if there are industries in a specific area, part of their profit should be reinvested in managing these resources. Partnership should be made in capacity building. We have a lot of higher learning institutes in the country, and we should tap this resource so that there's partnership in the sustainability of these resources. And then we have to institutionalize and increase support for the Philippine Navy and Coast Guard. Why? Because they're the ones that are guarding our resources. And I think there's not enough appreciation by the local population for how much this men and women in the Navy and Coast Guard are actually doing for the Philippines. Doc Cora will agree with me on this. If you ask a lot of young kids in the provinces what would they want to become, they will say policemen because of the telenovela that is police-oriented. Maybe we should have one about the Philippine Navy and Coast Guard so that a lot more people will appreciate the job that they do. And then finally, the Climate Change Commission and other higher learning institutes should have activities in de-risking our resource base. Because we are under a climate lens as well, we do know that we're part of the top 9 countries vulnerable in terms of marine and coastal with respect to climate change. And we should start planning with this in mind in the 50, 100-year horizon. Yun lang po. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lau. I am sure there are some questions there, but we have to go on and ask Maricor to continue and make us look beyond our man's natural wealth in the blue environment or in the blue ocean. You are preparing, let me just get one of these. From Inday, Professor Gretchen, this is a Stanford alumna. Thanks very much. Okay. Okay. And thereafter, I will cascade to our relevant departments in the DBP. It is noteworthy to mention that DBP has received various awards in green financing and we strictly impose conditions for financial projects to minimize negative environmental and social impact. Okay, she has to leave because she has another Zoom meeting. But I hope that DBP, Land Bank, and the other banks will also allocate resources so that we can optimally and sustainably tap the opportunities that our blue environment offers. Okay, Maricor, are you ready? Joanna, can we have the bio of both Maricor and Marian? So I can just go there while Maricor is preparing her PowerPoint. Congressman Kiko, do you have a point?
Just wanted to ask Dr. David for her contact info and her PowerPoint so that we can follow this up in the legislature.
We will be providing everybody a link to is Arnold here? How shall we do it? We will give you a storage where we will upload all of the presentations and the bios and the contact numbers of the presenters so that we can continue discussing this with them. And for some areas, we're actually creating groups that will really act on them because if we will just discuss things in a place like this and forget them, nothing will come out of this, no? So, okay. In the meantime, let me also ask our audience to contribute suggestions that we can put in our points, list of action points, which I prepared based on the PowerPoints that I got from all of our presenters, although they modified them, and so I will have to update the list. But we really would like to get suggestions from you on what are the things that different groups, starting with you and your community, our legislators, etc. Okay, Marian is already ready, so we can start. I'll just introduce her properly a little later. Joanna, I don't have her.
Thank you. I am
Okay.
just a while. I am changing the color of my laser.
Okay.
Okay, and let me see.
So Dr. Marian de Los Angeles has been working on this topic for several years, this accounting, which is really a very tedious work. And so she will share with us how far they've gone. And her group is also involved in the new, in the past and the new one, USAID Project CIBOL, which will make use of the INVEST software of Stanford's Natural Capital Project.
Valuing and accounting for our man's natural assets, how and what for. This picks up from the previous presentation of Dr. Lara and Avanza Rodora, which presented some figures, and will also be a precursor to Maricor's presentation, which has more valuation work. Here, however, we are looking into the economic values of ecosystem services, the constraints of standard economic accounting, some examples on valuation, more than advocacy, in particular uses for science-based decision-making in the blue economy, and institutionalizing natural capital accounts. The interaction between the environment and economic systems are shown in this diagram. Most of it has to do with use of goods and services from the ecosystem, provisioning for food, fuel, and wood, for example, and water, cultural services like education and recreation. And then we have here the ecosystem services, ecological functions for regulating support, which we will go into a little more detail later. These interactions are actually captured in the market because the commodities are traded, they are bought and sold. And in so doing, the receipts and all the transactions records are captured in the measurement of the gross national product. There are residuals that go into the go back to the ecosystem because of air emissions and discharges to land and water. And but there are also other values that are important. The value of exercising the use in the future instead of now, which we call option value, reserving the use for the future, and non-use values, knowing that we have unique ecosystems, unique flora, unique fauna. That is a value from existence. Altruism, that has to do with enjoying the fact that there are others who are benefiting from the resource. There are indigenous peoples who are taking care of the resource and are dependent on them as well. And then, of course, bequest values, leaving behind for legacy for future generations to use. These values have no markets, however, and so the satisfaction that we derive from them are not reflected, is not reflected in the measurement of economic welfare, like gross national product. Here is a more complicated slide about total economic value. I mentioned used value and non-used value, and the details of the indirect that were mentioned by the previous presenters, all these are actually embedded in the production of goods and services for provisioning or for cultural uses. But they are not paid for. They are actually, nature provides them for free. And understanding these as well requires understanding how they are produced ecologically. So there is what is called ecological production function analysis. And part of this is probably the basis of what Dr. Gretchen mentioned on the gross ecological product. The other values, which are not marketed, can be analyzed in terms of the demand for them. For example, those who have pleasure from the existence of the Philippine eagle or the tamarau or the mouse deer, when they contribute to the foundations who are conserving or funding the conservation of the habitats of these, are revealing their preference for the existence of these specific species. They can be looked into demand-wise, but all these will need collaboration among the natural and social scientists, as well as the modelers, the mathematicians, and the like. So we do not expect all of these values to appear in our system of national accounts, but at the very least, these ones should appear. Sorry, these ones should appear. And these ones are the subject of most of the studies of experts in think tanks and research institutes and consulting firms. So this constraint of the system of national accounts means that when our natural assets depreciated some time ago, they went unmeasured and unnoticed, and therefore not managed. Depreciation of physical or man-made capital, like houses and equipment, are in the national accounts, but natural assets depreciation are not in the national accounts. And because the ecosystem services have many users, albeit are not in markets, then we do not notice at all species loss or biodiversity decline. We did not notice deteriorated ecological functions until it was a bit late. And all these result in reduced well-being, including health risk increases from pandemics. They also result in higher vulnerability to climate change. Altogether, this means that economic growth, however high, may not be sustained far into the medium term or long term. As a result of these problems, several statisticians, economic statisticians, scientists, environmental economists, ecological economists, worked on several pilot studies in countries, some for the last 30 years. And these resulted in draft versions of what is called now as the System of Environment and Economic Accounting, finally approved as an international standard by the Statistical Commission in 2012 during the Rio +20 celebration. So this is the workbook or guidebook that has resulted from that. Let us find out now what we did not notice. Unmeasured and unmanaged renewable natural capital depreciation. Contrary to the popular perception some decades ago that we should worry about non-renewables, particularly oil and gas, and not about the biologically renewable natural resources like the fisheries and the forests, the renewables were actually depreciating faster than the non-renewables. This is the depreciation of fisheries, increasing in 1992, very high increase. This one for forests, the depreciation decreased a little bit, partly because we don't have much to depreciate anymore relative to the past. This is depreciation of soil horizon A, or the topsoil, which is what agriculture needs. And this is depreciation of minerals, particularly metallic minerals. So renewable natural resources depleted faster, more than the non-renewables. And it is actually worse for the small surface dwelling fisheries. This next slide is based on data that was gathered for these long years. And analysis was conducted hypothetically or retrospective analysis. The question asked was, if we had enough information about how our fish grew and the economics of catching fish and the returns from fish years ago, we would have thought of maximizing sustainable economic yield by expending 262,000 horsepower equivalent of fishing effort from both municipal and commercial fishers. And that would have given us catch of 569,000 metric tons and a revenue of this much, and an economic rent slightly lower, being a revenue minus normal return for profit. But this is the ideal. What actually happened was we expended double the ideal fishing effort. We caught less and we earned less revenue. And worse, many of our municipal fishers, who are the ones dependent on surface dwelling fisheries, actually earned zero economic rent. They earned only enough for their return to labor, which is really bringing them only to subsistence fishing. And some of them have actually left the fishing sector because of this problem. So the issue here is to regulate fishing. And the regulation is already happening now through the Community Sea Patrol or Bantay Dagat. As well, develop alternative livelihood, such as those that were mentioned earlier. We also need to manage better our coastal and marine ecosystems. Let's now find out what had happened since then. Considerable conservation investments were made in marine protected areas. In this slide, we are showing the value of key biodiversity areas in these parts of the country. And this was estimated by Rina Rosales, my co-presenter from her EcoFish project funded by USAID. Fisheries valued at this much, marine culture, more, marine protected areas, and many of these have to do with non-consumptive uses, the recreational values, the beach use, snorkeling, scuba diving, very high marine protected areas values. Mangroves even higher, both because of aquatic resources that can be gathered from mangroves, but also the storm surge and wind protection, as well as carbon sequestration function. The last two, however, are not marketed, are not paid for. They are provided for free. And then you have here recreation in the open seas and not in these marine protected areas. There's even a lot more here. That's good news, but many of the values that we cite here, while high, are not captured by the local governments, who are the ones who are supposed to be stewards of the coastal waters. They only earn up to 4% of these values. So there's an economic instrument that needs to be developed for allowing the local government units to share in the high economic values from coastal resources. Valuation can also lead to estimates for penalties. In this case, we're talking about an accident that happened in the Tubatahe Reef Natural Marine Park in 2012. And Rina Rosales, my co-presenter, earlier estimated the net benefits from this unique ecosystem. And she had a number of figures which have total values. This one translates the total values into per square meter per unit of area. So we have recreational value, research value, fish products, not necessarily in the park because fishing is prohibited there, but in the surrounding areas which benefit from the reef ecosystems. And a special survey that she conducted on those who were willing to pay for the conservation of this unique area. And altogether, the amount is something like 211 pesos per square meter economic value. So because of the accident, that economic value is lost, hopefully only temporarily. And so the fine that was estimated was this amount times 45 years, which the experts she consulted estimated to be the time it would take for restoration to take place and for productivity to be fully gained. So this is the single fine that was implemented. and amounting to 12,000 per square meter adjusted for inflation between 2006 and 2012, plus actual restoration activities by the said party. Now the fine has been improved to adjust for inflation. That's one function of valuation. Another function of looking into the ecological protection, ecological services is flood protection that mangroves provide. This is a retrospective counterfactual analysis of data gathered by specialists from different groups collaborating, international groups. What they looked at, based on 13 typhoon hit areas, was flooding. Two types: flooding from the normal rainy season and thunderstorms and waves, and flooding from typhoons. What they showed is that had we not decimated the mangroves that were available in 1950, only this much flooding would have occurred. But in 2010, our mangroves were much lower, and so the flooding that occurred is indicated here. This is the difference. Now, if these mangroves were not protected and these were going to be zero some point in time, flooding would become worse, and this much would be additional flooding. You have some similar occurrence here, higher occurrence of flooding. And here what we are looking at is the people who are poor who are affected. And so no mangrove loss would have avoided annual flood damage on 57,000 poor people out of the 279 affected population. The annual property loss that would have been avoided is this much. The final slide that gives you numbers has to do with using indicators from natural capital accounts to analyze management options. In this case, we looked at the Lingayen Gulf fisheries, which is where the 100 Islands National Park is located, for those of you who have visited it. The fisheries were noted to be already declining in productivity. And so the studies looked into options to arrest that decline. One option is to ban additional fishers, be they commercial or municipal. So no growth from year zero for all fishers. That would have meant maintaining the fishing effort at this level in year 3, as well as the same level in year 5. And that would bring us to an economic yield of 8,700 metric tons. The other option is to allow municipal fishers historical growth because they are poor and they do not necessarily have other sources of income in the immediate future, but to ban growth, additional growth in commercial fishing. This would mean fishing effort by this much in year 3 and a higher fishing effort in year 5. Yield would be this level, lower than the no growth level, and even much lower by year 5. Finally, the worst case scenario is unregulated fishing. Fishing effort would increase drastically to 102,000 horsepower and higher in year 5, and yields would drastically go down to even 750 by year 5. These are examples of how information from natural capital accounts can be transformed into indicators to assist analysts provide better options, better science-based data for decision makers. The result in this particular case was that commercial fishing was banned by a fisheries administrative order in 1998. But this was short-lived success. The Lingayen Gulf Coastal Area Management Commission, a presidential commission, was abolished later by a new president. The current situation is also very alarming. We have considerable illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, or IUUF, in all our waters from our neighboring countries. There is also persistent lobbying from the commercial fishers to reduce the area of municipal fishing so that they could fish in those areas. This is characteristic of conflict when resources become scarcer. So what do we have with respect to natural capital accounting? Since the 90s, there had been projects that had been contributing to the global experimentation on valuation that would be incorporated into the measurement of gross national product and net national product. These were the two major projects, and they presented consistently to the Philippine Council for Sustainable Development, multi-stakeholder, founded and led by our Secretary Habito, and all together resulted or catalyzed the issuance of Presidential Executive Order to institute the Philippine Environmental and Economic Accounts, or PINRA. After these projects finished in the 2000s decade, there was some kind of a hiatus. Part of it was there was considerable debate and the standard was not yet approved internationally. And the other reason was there was no political support. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources suffered from constant changes in leadership. The secretary was changed 4 times. So there was a hiatus, but this stopped recently. The SEA was approved and the World Bank Wealth Accounting and the Valuation of Ecosystem Services Global Partnership Program included the Philippines as one of its initial pilot countries. Thus, mineral accounts, accounts for water and fisheries in Laguna Lake, and multi-sectoral accounts for Southern Palawan were developed by the Philippine Statistical Authority in collaboration with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Laguna Lake Development Authority, and the Palawan Council, for Sustainable Development. I mention this because a lot of collaboration is very much needed for natural capital accounting. Moreover, globally, there is a draft experimental ecosystem accounting handbook that is currently undergoing global consultation, which could hopefully provide standards for some, if not all, of the ecosystem services accounting in the very near future. We look forward to that. And now, can we continue it? Of course. Should we continue it? Yes. We should institutionalize NCA, and in particular for the blue economy, because the institutionalization for the others are already underway. There's a land accounts and water accounts that the PSA is working on. For the blue economy, the initial work by PEMC is very laudable. They are, however, based on marketed goods and services, and much more analysis can come out of the numbers there, as well as expansion of the numbers to include more ecosystem services. We will need long-term capacity. The 60 or so counterparts we trained 30 years ago have already moved on, have retired, have migrated, or have passed away. We have to train for replacement because the skills are not easy and they need to be made use of for decision making. A regular budget has to be provided for both the PSA and the rest of the institutions linked with the PSA to implement NCA. There is also considerable research in the universities and other institutions, and their work needs to be linked to the PINRA. Their work is most of the time ground level, ecosystem specific, protected area level, and if we have a lot of those, then that would altogether help us come up with a richer PINRA. Regular updates are needed. And the data has to be improved. New science for data gathering was mentioned. We need to geotag data, whether they are regular data, that is monitoring and enforcement data, or data generated by surveys on households and establishments, as well as data generated by researchers. They need to be geotagged so that other analysts could come up with solid ecosystem services. Hopefully, the Senate bill that was drafted in 2013 by former Senator and now Deputy Speaker Legarda would be followed through by both the Senate and the Congress now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anne. We like to do now is call on Admiral George to present your piece. And in the meantime, can we have the bio flashed and also that of Ms. Marlene Colette? Okay, so Admiral George Ursabia is the head of the Philippine Coast Guard, the 27th Commandant. And of course, he's a graduate of PMA with MS in Maritime and all of these tasks as a skipper, commander of the PCG fleet and PCG districts. So we'd like to hear from him this important, very important project that I am personally interested to help PCG to realize, and I think there are some other people who are also interested, and I hope Deputy Speaker Legarda and Congressman Kiko will also be interested to help later on. But we will just be starting with the first one. Eventually, we will need one per region. Take it away, Admiral George.
Everyone, it's indeed an honor to be here, to be invited here, and I extend my sincerest gratitude to Dr. Corazon and Claudio for inviting me here, while the Philippine Coast Guard is a home, for us to have this opportunity to present our proposal for a Philippine Coast Guard hospital ship. As an archipelago, there are many places that are difficult to reach, if not impossible, without a good designed ship. Among 180 countries in the 2019 World Risk Index, the Philippines was ranked as the 9th most at risk of natural disaster. A World Bank study also mentions that calamities derail social and economic development. Thus, as a developing country, disaster preparedness is a critical component in achieving economic growth. While hospital ships were originally employed as floating casualty care centers and ambulances during wartime, it was inevitable and logical that they would also be employed in humanitarian assistance and disaster response operations. These ships were at the forefront of sustained operations to treat the injured and provide food and medical assistance to survivors, I should say, of natural or man-made disasters, be these earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, typhoons, or terror attacks. A thoughtfully designed Philippine Coast Guard hospital ship that features best-in-class capabilities will play a crucial role in economic development by increasing our disaster preparedness and enhancing our ability to provide primary care to coastal municipalities that are difficult to reach. With the enactment of the Coast Guard Law of 2009, otherwise known as Republic Act 9993, the Philippine Coast Guard has been vested with the necessary authority and responsibility to perform the preventive measures in ensuring the safety of the maritime public. Thus, the PCG Strategic Development Plan provided the need for a hospital ship. It states, to enhance its capability to fulfill its mandate to protect the Filipino people not only from armed threats, but from the ill effects of life-threatening and destructive consequences of natural and man-made disasters and calamities, including typhoons, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, major accidents in far-flung or in inaccessible terrain or at sea, and from all forms of ecological damage. The way to determine the medical payload requirement to support military operation is to use the most significant military operations ever undertaken by the AFP and PNP during these modern times. These are the battle for Marawi, the Lamitan Siege, the Mamasakano Clash. Shown also are the total soldiers and civilians needing hospital treatment during those battles and clashes. But most notable is the data on COVID-19 pandemic. There are several hospital ships that can be used as models, but the most optimally sized hospital ship for the Philippines is the Vietnam Navy's HQ-561 Can Hua. The Shipbuilding Science and Technology Institute of the Vietnam Shipbuilding Industry Corporation designed the vessel and was built in 2012. It has a length of 70.6 meters, equipped with facilities and devices that are just as modern as those in Vietnamese mainland hospitals, but has only 15 hospital beds. The vessel is proposed to have the following missions. First, to respond to maritime disasters and calamities, perform medical missions to far-flung areas in need of primary medical care, and support maritime coastal operations. This ensures that the vessel performs its missions effectively and economically. The resultant vessel is a hospital ship like no other. It is between 70 to 85 meters long, with a minimum beam of 12 meters and a draft of not more than 3 meters, a speed of not less than 25 knots, a range of not less than 4,000 nautical miles, and an endurance of not less than 45 days. In addition to the crew, it can carry a medical staff of at least 20 doctors and nurses to operate 4 5-patient wards, 2 operating rooms, an emergency room, a consultation room, a dental clinic, an X-ray room, a medical laboratory, storage spaces for medical supplies, an elevator to carefully transport patients to different decks, a helicopter deck, 2 ambulance-carrying high-speed landing crafts, cargo bay, beaching ramp, hyperbaric chamber, and a morgue, among others. The vessel is estimated to cost $3 billion for the ship and $1 billion for all other equipment needed. It can be sourced out through general annual appropriation in a multi-year obligation, or it can be linked to the budget base from the current pandemic emergency situation of our country. Additionally, public-private partnership can also be a source of funds. It would take around 18 to 24 months to build. There are available local shipbuilders that can undertake this project, like in Cebu, where Austal Australia is located. Other available countries are Singapore, South Korea, France, and USA. Manpower will be primarily from Philippine Coast Guard. Likewise, although we have enough medical doctors, nurses, and medical staff in our organization, recruitment is still open to build and develop our medical capability. We also welcome medical volunteers, both from local and foreign non-governmental organizations who we believe are very much willing to help. On governance, we are eyeing for a multi-sectoral advisory board to sustain fund for specialized medical professionals. Also to ensure resilience and sustainability amid changes in PCG leadership. For the good of our people, it is suggested that it is high time that the Philippines start the capability to produce its own naval platforms like all developed economies and credible navies in the world. Failure to do so would just be like disasters themselves, a hindrance to economic growth and prosperity. It will take 2 years before a hospital ship can be made fully operational. Originally employed for wartime purposes and to support naval medical requirements, hospital ships have transcended these roles to emerge as critical assets in humanitarian assistance, disaster response, and crisis response. Their acquisition, therefore, represents a wise investment well worth the cost, as was proven historically. For an archipelago like the Philippines, the hospital ship is an indispensable tool for disaster response. The country need not to wait for the next disaster and wish it had at least one. That ends my presentation, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Admiral George. I think many of our members of the audience are hearing it for the first time, and we will go after them, especially the ones from MAP, because this is really something that I am personally supporting well, because I have personal experience in dealing with cases of not being able to, patients not being able to reach hospitals which are in cities. We'd like to call on Ms. Marlene Colette, who is like a Filipina, more Filipina than some Filipinas. She is the special envoy to the Philippines of Mercy Ships International, founder and president of Sea Change, which is into social entrepreneurship, and has worked extensively in different countries, including the Philippines. No, you can see the list there. When they were here, she served as senior governance specialist at ADB. We came to know each other when she was still in SIDA. And he also helped the Philippines set up our judicial reform project on using, what you call that, the courts, the new courts, no? And then she has served over the past 10 years as chair of Mercy Ships Canada and director of the International Board of Health Bridge International. She has master's degree in social work and international policy and evaluation. Marlene, take it away. After this, we will have Deputy Speaker Ligarda, and those who would like to chat with us for the open forum, we will be happy to discuss things with you.
Great. Well, I'm really grateful that Cora has given me this opportunity on World Maritime Day to make my very first presentation on Mercy ships to the Philippines. So I'll just put on my PowerPoint here. Can everybody see this? Cora, are you able to see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
okay.
Can see.
Great. Okay. I'm very flattered to be invited, and particularly along with all the esteemed colleagues. And nice to meet you, Vice Admiral George. I am also pleased to see Shal Habito.
Admiral, full-fledged Admiral.
Saladito, when I was a young CETA officer, I think I presented to him at one point the CETA plan for the Philippines. Anyway, yeah, I'm here to talk about the really exciting news that we're going to have our Mercy Ship's brand new hospital. Its first port of call will be in Subic Bay in the Philippines. It is due to arrive on the 16th of April in 2021. Now, I know that's a little far away, but no time like the present to start talking about it, because we expect that the new Global Mercy is going to be in Subic Bay for about 4 to 6 months, where it will have its outfitting. So it will arrive as a basic boat, and when it leaves, it will be a hospital, because during the time that it's in Subic Bay, it will have about 80 containers of equipment being placed on the ship to make sure that all of its materials and equipment requirements and testing, the equipment is done while it's there. So we're really thrilled that Subic Bay Authority is giving our new hospital ship a berth there for that period of time. So I'd just like to say a couple of things about Mercy Ships. If you don't know much about it, and probably many of you don't, but every year about 16.9 people in the world die from lack of surgery. And about 6% of those about 6% of all operations are delivered to the poorest countries, only 6%. So we know that in the poorest countries, particularly in Africa, there are many people who have no access to surgery or health services. So Mercy Ships has been operating since 1978, and essentially it's been spending most of its service along the west coast of Africa to the poorest and most disadvantaged of the developing countries. It provides life-saving surgeries, and for example, on to the next one. For example, last year in Africa, it was in Guinea, and it provided about 13,000 operations to the poorest people, including dental surgeries. So overall, Mercy Ships has provided about 105,500 life-saving surgical procedures, and these operations that take place on our ship are of two kinds: direct medical services to those people who are most disadvantaged, arrive at the ship, and we also provide medical capacity training to many local health professionals. So the types of surgeries that we undertake on the ship are cleft palate, of course, and cleft lip repair, cataract removal, orthopedic and facial reconstruction, burn and contractive release, pediatric, general, and obstetric fistula repair, and we have performed about 500,000 dental procedures. Last year, we set up a dental school at the university in Guinea, the University of Conakry. So this is just a quick snapshot of the kind of services that Mercy Ships provides. So just to tell you more about our Global Mercy, again, the Global Mercy is a brand new hospital built from the bottom up. And as I said, it will arrive as a boat, but it is just about to have its sea trials in the port of Tianjin. Now, it was built in Tianjin, China, for a cost of about $110 million. It weighs 37,000 metric tons, and it's about 171 meters long and about 23, 24 meters wide. So it's a huge ship. It's as large as any cruise ship. One of the reasons the Chinese were interested in building our ship was because they wanted a prototype for their cruise ships as they expand their own maritime jurisdiction, as well as their own maritime hospitality for their own citizens. So with the addition of this new ship, we already have one ship which is right now in the Canary Islands having a refit. once we have these two ships, we'll be able to double the capacity of what these ships can provide. The Global Mercy, the one that you see here, has a capacity for about 930 people operating on it every day in terms of ship's crew, nurses and surgeons, and generally all of the people that help to make a hospital run. And we expect that the equipment that's being put on in Subic Bay, with these 80 containers, it will cost us about $47 million. So far, we have paid the cost of the ship at $110 million. That has been money that donations been saved by people all around the world who donate to Mercy Ships. And must say that incredible work was done by our 16 national offices around the world. So we have one office in Canada. We also have another 15 national offices in countries in Europe and Australia, New Zealand, Korea. And hopefully after the new Global Mercy leaves the Philippines, we'll have an office as well, a Mercy Ships office in the Philippines. So you can see here that the ship itself has about 199 hospital beds. It has a simulation training center, a simulation lab, where local doctors and health professionals will be able to learn how to do eye surgeries and how to do different types of complex maxillofacial surgeries. And as I said before, it has space to accommodate about 600 volunteers that will come from all over the world. Our current ship has at any given time about 2,000 volunteers on it, and they come right now from about 55 different countries. So I'm really excited about the opportunity that Subic Bay has given to our new ship, and we hope that many of you will be able to visit, come down and do some tours of the ship to see how it functions. And ultimately, I'm hoping that before it sails on its maiden voyage to Africa, that we'll be able to have an appreciation event to thank all of the people involved in Subic Bay Authority and in the port and in the Maritime League and all those journalists who will hopefully come out and do some pieces about the work of Mercy Ships. We hope to do an appreciation event, for which I'm very grateful to Dr. Claudio for helping me make the kinds of connections that I will need to make that welcome event and then a farewell and appreciation event happen. So I hope that I've given you a quick brief overview of what our new ship is going to look like and what to expect when it arrives in Subic Bay. And once again, I would be happy to invite all of you to come and share the exhilaration of the fact that the new ship will spend its first port of call in the Philippines, and we will be very grateful for all the hospitality that's given. Okay, I'll stop there and happy to answer any of your questions. I should say one other thing, but I'm really hoping that Mercy Ships will be able to provide technical assistance to the Philippine Coast Guard and help the Coast Guard to realize its dream of having a hospital ship specifically for the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Arlene. I think we have so much connection problems here. I'm being cut off once in a while. Thank you very much. And so we will have more a chat session after this, but I'd like to call on our deputy speaker because she has also been waiting for her time. We're a little late. So can we flash please the bio, and I would like to request her assistant to advise her that we'll be ready in a while. So as we know, she is a deputy speaker now of the Philippine House of Representatives, representing the Lone District of Antique. She was our senator for 3 terms, and she got the highest votes in 2 elections. She has earned a lot of recognitions, and I just chose these two ones from the long list because I'm familiar with this organization. So you have UNISDR as Global Champion for Resilience. That's especially against climate change, and a UNEP laureate. She's a BS cum laude graduate of UP and top-notcher in National Defense College of the Philippines. We have many from Philippine Coast Guard and some from the Navy here and some from the Maritime League, right? So you're familiar with this. She's a graduate of Command and General Staff College of the AFP and a PAF reservist with the full colonel rank. She already received a Doctor of Laws, so we can also address her as a doctor, honoris causa from UP. It's more difficult to get that than to get to go to school and get a PhD. And she has been given knighthood recognition by two countries, France and Italy. Of course, she is a Towns awardee. There are 3 Towns awardees in this event: Dr. Lau David, Deputy Speaker Loren, and yours truly. Okay, so Deputy Speaker Loren, are you okay?
Dr. Claudio, good afternoon and warm ecological greetings. I hope that I'm coming in loud and clear. I see the beautiful corals behind you. I know that that is virtual because I know that you are not underwater. And I'm honored to be with you as we discuss our maritime and archipelagic nation, one of the most biodiverse in the world. Just to warn you, I have 12 pages in hard copy and more in soft copy. I will try to take snippets because I know that we are almost 1 hour behind. And yes, I was with you from the opening at 12 noon, and I've witnessed the interesting, comprehensive, and informative presentations of your various speakers. I just want to share with you my lifelong work on environment, on climate change and disaster risk reduction, and the recent spate of disasters, including the pandemic, which we are still in. Having authored more than 8 environmental laws in the Senate from 1998 pre-pandemic, my experience has shown that implementation and enforcement clearly needs funding, a push and a shove, and much more. I hope that the Management Association of the Philippines can actually study all the laws and compel all the agencies of government to divide the countries into regions which we are already politically and geographically divided, so that we can actually, in our oversight function, see whether they're actually implementing all these laws, and I will get to that. I mightily gave that push and shove, as you know, when I became chair of the Senate Finance Committee in 2015, where we discussed budgets of government agencies, and to my horrendous surprise, many important laws were under-enforced, not enforced, and unfunded, including the Ecological Solid Waste Management Law. The extent to which budgets can be scrutinized then and now is critical to a transition to a better norm. But more than the current budgets, in which correcting the skew towards more budget has been a matter of mere insertions, I realize that what we need to do to upend the way we treat economics entirely and in surprisingly easy ways is really to see. It's not just a matter of putting in budgets, it is a matter of complying with the soul and the heart of the law. The pattern I saw with these laws at the turn of the millennium, many of which I authored, is that we move the responsibility of environmental protection inevitably to the individual and the household level. Ecological solid waste, for example, has to be segregated at source, recycled, and composted. So I ask the MAP and its members and officers, I ask all our speakers today, do you have a minimum of 3 trash bins in your bedroom, in your home, in your community, in your barangay? As simple as that. And if it's not, then we have something to do and much work to be done after this webinar. even gave citizens the right to sue, even though they are not themselves directly injured. You see, in our country, we clearly see that the dominant culture for the women is still to hold the purse. And it gives us a clear approach to making all these resources count. In many localities and barangays, we see it is the women who actually construct the MRF, Material Recovery Facility. It is the women who actually are at the forefront of ecological solid waste, just like perhaps what Mother Earth Foundation of Sonia Mendoza is doing. These obligations make our waste materials count as assets. What do I mean? When you segregate waste at source, recycle and compost, of course, it does not go to the open sea, to the rivers and even the esteros and the brooks and the rivers. And therefore, we're able to use it as food waste into organic waste for urban gardens and even food gardens. Incidentally, I also filed the Food Garden Act in the House of Representatives, but I'll get to that later. In the realm of the national economy, we have been operating not as a household that jealously guards our resources and sparingly dispenses them. I would admit that trickle-down economics has proven in recent decades to be somewhat real in the sense that millions of people have been lifted out of poverty with rapid and sustained economic growth, including the Philippines. But ignorance, as they say, is bliss. When the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services released the report last year on the impending crashes on biodiversity, coming as it does on the heels of the IPCC, it became obvious that experts were talking over each other's heads and that drastic and dramatic efforts are needed to make sure that these panels are able to communicate their studies and researches to economic planners, or else all the gains in economic terms that we are traditionally used to will just run into an ecological spasm, meaning chains of extinctions and ecosystem collapses that affect our food systems, our water provisions, our whole sustainable livelihood. The pandemic has afforded us a ringside seat and a gigantic opportunity to reverse this trend. We need to use this new lens in order to show that the pursuit of economic growth and poverty alleviation must not compromise life on our planet. We can treat the national purse in the same way that we do our household, as we have forgotten that the root word in economics is still oikos, or home. But this time, this housekeeping has to be in a macro scale, and for this we need to generate data and use that data judiciously. One of the reasons we do not have this data on hand is the cost their generation entails, and the human resources and the expertise we need rests only on a handful, and many of them are, of course, participating in this informative webinar. Now, how do we short-circuit the generation of such data and their use in national decision-making? I am inspired by the story one of my staff mentioned to me about a Subanon community who had a store of around 600 cultivars of rice, agricultural biodiversity at its finest. But rice seeds, as you know, palay is also rice. And during a particularly brutal drought, the community had to eat the store of cultivars, erasing seed selection carefully selected over decades, if not generations. It was easy to imagine that sending the community a stable food supply, bigas, over the period of a drought would have been hundreds of times less costly than a huge refrigerated seed vault. Another very good example is tourism, where we measure success in tourist arrivals and revenues. In the failure to account for externalities, many of our prime sites have shown us that we are quite late somehow in reacting, and that unless we use metrics that include the environment, we will only be facing cycles of tourism boom and bust instead of relying in a pandemic-resistant industry of small-scale outdoors establishments that bring people closer to nature. And on a basic needs front, we are failing to realize that the cost of delivering clean water to households in our large metropolis is only going to be higher and higher, demanding more and more of contribution from sources that otherwise supplied forests and irrigation. The WAVES project, an ecosystem valuation exercise for Laguna Lake, showed us that 81% of the pollution of the lake is from domestic sources, going up to 90% for Manila Bay. To date, no more than 20% of Metro Manila is seweraged. And this is where the law which I authored in my first term should be applied, and that is the Clean Water Act of 2003. And it should be RA 9003 of 2001. Just implement strictly those two laws of ecological solid waste and clean water. And all these discussions of the blue economy today will probably be ink on paper or soft copy, because we've actually really retained and preserved our blue economy, which has become murky, brown, or gray because of non-compliance to our already enacted environmental laws. If we compare the costs of developing full sewerage coverage in Metro Manila, all the treated water can be used for industrial and household non-potable needs. The longer we delay the building, the higher the cost would be, and the more we'll be spending in cleaning up Manila Bay. It no longer matters whether concessionaires or government should be spending that money, as consumers will have to pay for it one way or the other. What matters is that it be spent at the soonest possible time to prevent both higher costs and the collapse of Manila Bay and the tributaries and all river systems and lakes attached to it. I'm 100% certain that if we did such calculations in all government projects and considered externalities and overall impacts rather than just project costs or traditional economic projections, we will have greener and bluer cities, more active, sustainable transport, less pollution, not just in the air, but even in our waterways, and a more resilient, greener, healthier, better quality of life. There are micro solutions for some of these problems. A payment for ecosystem services has been established in Mount Kalatungan, where hopefully the fate of the Subanon's cultivars can be avoided. The payments to the indigenous community demonstrated to have successfully reforested their domains started 5 years ago, goes on till now. This system of conservation of the mountain ranges found support among the metropolitan area of Cagayan de Oro, which suffered from massive flooding during Typhoon Sendong some years back, largely due to unfortunate location on the river delta, due to the settlements in some areas and inordinate amounts of water flowing through mountain ranges, made almost bare by vast tracts of monoculture and even perhaps illegal logging. It is never easy to negotiate payments of intangibles, protections of mere parts of the forest where policies still favor high economic returns from traditional agricultural practices. But the people in this area who did decide to pay for these ecological services have paid a previous price and are willing to break down the cost to avoid a similar high price in the future. In the macro scale, the DNR's NGP, I believe it has much to be desired, but it tries, it attempts to measure the impact on poverty and carbon. We still have to see its design drilled down to craft the strategies that would make the investment deliver more outcomes on biodiversity and bring species back from the brink. But I promised you easy solutions, solutions that are made easier by the pandemic, as we see more clearly that we cannot get back to the old norm. And that is the gist of the Better Normal Bill passed in the House of Representatives and now pending in the Senate, where I used to be. The solutions are easy only in the sense that they are housekeeping ones. We need to go back to the basics and make the calculations and not break the bank with an expensive calculator. In other words, our investment in gaining the knowledge to make these decisions has to be within bounds. Traditional resource economics, despite it being a fairly new field, is costly. but we can start with honing in on our most pressing and interrelated problems and make the calculations for those. The intersection between natural resources and livelihoods is more pronounced. Most rural poor rely on the natural resource base, and I know because I am the representative of a once regarded poor province, which is not actually poor because it is rich in natural resource base. In a slide used by Dr. Daly in a recent lecture, we are high on the scale where people's needs and nature's contributions intersect, which is also why we are one of the most vulnerable nations to the threats of climate change, as you know. Hence, any sweeping changes and high impact solutions must take into account the majority who rely directly on ecosystems for their survival, which brings me to Manamo. The most interrelated and widely felt problems we have are related to water. Our most heartbreaking disasters, Ondoy of long ago, 10 years ago, Yolanda and Sendong of more recent years, were about water. Manila Bay is about water. Pasig River is about water. Laguna Lake is about water. Using a ridge to reef approach, our conservation efforts in the terrestrial realm are also very much water issues. Let me first say that I am elated. Our president finally rejected attempts to undermine the arbitral award in the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea. In his words, the award is, and I quote, "the triumph of reason over rashness, of law over disorder, of amity over ambition." But please allow me to point out that about 80 pages out of that 501-page arbitral decision was on the failure to protect and preserve the marine environment, and actually cite studies that include valuation. Beyond the damage in the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea, stewardship of our water resources, heavy guarding of our water cycle, and acceptance that we have to clean up the water we use in our cities because the Earth's capacity to do so in these areas has been breached. All these can be calculated using data that may already exist and supported by the work of our resource economists in this event. Projects have already generated a great deal of data on resource economics and natural capital. Data is generated every day as we cross over to digital economics. Scientists are churning out data that remain in the dustbins. It is time that we use what we have, carefully manage our resources to generate the data we urgently need to make better decisions in our economy. I will be refiling the Philippine Economic, Environmental, and Natural Resource Accounting Bill. I actually filed it as senator way back in 2016, but I'm updating it so that it is more relevant, especially during this pandemic. The Earth has cooled us in many ways since then, and I am partial to making this a truly practical and game-changing law by incorporating it with the environmental impact assessment system and the revisions of the laws covering that. We are currently studying the DENR is also helping with this, and hopefully we can implement its mandate without being schizophrenic about it, about natural resource extraction and environmental protection, and analyzing the very setup. And so the PINRA should not be merely an analysis of a sector. This needs a whole of government approach, and we're looking to starting this through the Cabinet Cluster on Climate Change so that the departments of Agriculture, DBM even, Finance, Social Welfare too, should take into account ecological services and all pull together to prevent an ecosystem collapse. It cannot be one department protecting the environment, one department extracting, and the same department protecting. It should be a whole of government approach, just like DRR and CCAM must be mainstream and not just one little department of government managing it or talking about it. During the pandemic, government saw fit to provide a social amelioration package, as you know, SAP, that would help the most vulnerable among us. But even prior to this, we had the 4 Ps. This is as close to a guaranteed basic income as we've ever come. If we continue on the path of bringing people out of poverty through economic growth, we will also continue on the path of rapid ecological decline. What we may need to consider is a guaranteed basic income from nature. We can assure this by redirecting our budgets to the costs for ensuring that nature continues to provide and that we survive the coming threats from climate and future pandemics. It is clear that while the pandemic has cost us so much, the issue of climate change and breaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius elevation will cost us much, much more than COVID-19. Water, and our being a maritime and archipelagic nation, has given us a handle on how to proceed. As generations of women before us wove their stories and lessons into their textiles and other close advocacy, so too should we weave ecosystem services and natural capital into the fabric of every household and into our natural story. We ignore these lessons to our peril. Now there are pitfalls. When you place a monetary value on things in order for our economists and financial managers to realize its value, you're also falling into the trap of commodifying everything. And that is where the appreciation of the intricate interconnection in biodiversity and how nature works can come into show to show us that we are merely trying to persuade with these figures, but we cannot know and cannot assign an artificial value to life and the systems that support it. Hence, TINRA would need to include an aspect of recognition that nature has rights, and it may be possible to legislate protections in recognition of those rights. And we see that during this pandemic. This way, we can pay attention to the fact that as we place price tags on things of unimaginable and incalculable value, we remain beholden to nature, and we show our homage by recognizing that existence for natural systems and ecosystems and natural places is a matter of right. Having said all these, I assure you that as your ally in the House of Representatives, as your senator from 1998, who crafted and drafted and fought for more than 8 environmental laws as principal author and sponsor, rest assured, I will continue to champion resilient marine ecosystems, adaptable coastal communities, sustainable economic development for a safer, more secure, more equitable present time and future for the Filipino people, now and beyond. Thank you, Dr. Claudio, for having me. Thank you to all our esteemed speakers for the informative webinar today. It was worthy of my 3 hours and a half this busy workday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that deserves big applause. Maricor, you might want to listen to this also. And then if you, Maricor, are you around? Can you already present yours on oceans? Okay. So if you're not, then we'll go ahead and start our open forum. Because I see that some of our key speakers are still here and may be able to help us answer your difficult questions. Working. Maybe we can have another time for it. Joanna, can we kindly put our list of actions? Because also our time. Okay. Why is my action points on the right? Okay. Pardon that. Okay, I summarized it really well. As you can see, less words, no? Based on the presentations that were given to me in advance by our presenters and my own thoughts about the matter. And so I'm submitting it to you, and I will also put this in our Facebook for you to add, including the site-specific issues that some of you have mentioned in the chat box and Q&A. First is to learn to plan and act like a man, okay? Unfortunately for us women, our country is a man, okay? And we need to plan and act like that. I think our president acted very much like that at the UN recently, okay? But we really need to follow up all of this, and after hearing all of our speakers, we can see that there are many challenges, but there are also great opportunities for us. And one of the things that I will do is in MAP, we also organize investment fora. And maybe those of you who have proposals, who have technologies that may be funded, we can organize all of them and see which ones are ready to be funded. Because my belief always is if you have good projects, funding is not so much an issue, because capital runs after in good investment opportunities. Okay. So now the natural capital accounting. Wait, excuse me, Joanna, I'm not yet through with this, which I abbreviated as NCA. The accounting, of course, includes the valuation for policy and decision making. So I hope that we will have more interactions with Stanford. I saw in the, if you open YouTube, Dr. Gretchen has many YouTubes there that are very informative. And also, there is a series on the Invest software. So maybe we can have a, what you call this, watch party, and then we can shoot the questions to them after. So we work with our legislators, principally Senator, I always call her still Senator, Deputy Speaker Loren, plus I think Congressman, Representative, how do you call yourselves? Congressman Kiko also has ideas, and some members of the Committee on Economic also have ideas. So maybe we can put all of these together and be sure that this moves, and we will do our share of helping in some of the nitty-gritty analysis and writing up, and also advocacy. And then develop and adapt and apply NCA strategies and methods, especially the ones that we may need that are more adaptable to us. So the Invest app is one that Stanford has already developed. Okay, the next slide, please. I don't know yet how to do the sharing. I think my PowerPoint is not working very well last time, no? Okay, this is a very simple model. I call it my Bila-Bila-O model, because this is used in also in risk assessment and management. I presented this at an international conference years back after I graduated with my PhD, which is focused on decision and risk analysis. And somebody in the audience, who is the editor of the Risk Analysis Journal, asked me to simplify my long speech, and he made it an editorial, because at the time, even US EPA only had this model inside. So assess, the result of assessment is the starting point of management. And then it's an afterthought that you do communication, share the results with the people. And my point is, communication must be there all the time. What we are doing now on the national natural capital accounting is communication, because we have to bring parties together, policymakers, decision makers, those who will use what we want to propose together to a common ground that will allow good assessment and thereafter management to take place. Okay, next one, please. I have to add more on this. You see, this is the 4th year of our supposed to be celebration of Manamo. But I think sometimes we are talking to ourselves, no? Because there have been several activities, even just this week. Marina had a very nice present. We had our Maritime League and this one. But we are all really working in this area too, no? What about the rest who have not even heard of Manamo, and the fact that we host the center of marine biodiversity in the world? So I think there is a lot more work to do here. And what I did before I left the Board of Advisors of the Philippine Navy is to develop for them a mobile marine and naval centrum. And Deputy Speaker Loren was also with us when we launched it. We had about almost 50 interactive exhibits. Now we want to do something like that in an app because it's quite expensive to have a physical set of interactive exhibits. So, but then I ask now, let's conduct a survey. This is a challenge to universities, and some of you are here, for you to encourage your students to do research on, conduct a survey on status of the knowledge, attitude, and practice of what the Manamo proclamation encourages people to do. What has been done on it, no? Okay, next one, please. Explore collaborative NCA project on marine natural capital in WPS. We can have it with China since Dr. Gretchen is already advising the Chinese government, the scientists, no? Kasi iba, the scientists think differently from the politicians, no? So maybe at the scientific level of professionals, we might be able to understand each other very well and really recognize the importance of protecting, of conserving, and sustainably using the marine life there. It's a spawning ground of some of the fishes, I think most of the fishes that we catch, we nurture and catch in our river systems. Okay. Now, support the hospital ship project, which is part of addressing SDG number 3, that is good health and well-being. We hope to have a potential MOA with Mercy Ships International between them and the Philippines on the training of management and medical staff. I don't know why my words move there. And then welcome MSI's largest hospital ship in 2021. We hope to invite most of you in the events that will happen starting the time they arrive here until they leave. So they will not be able to do any treatment here, but they will be here for 6 months for the interior installation of interior furnishings and fixtures and the hospital equipment. Okay, so do I have one more? What do I have something else there? Okay, nawala yung drone, nawala yung bird ko. So we believe we can fly para sa ating likas kayang pagunlad. Yun daw ang ibig sabihin. That's what is meant by sustainable development. The translation in Filipino, para sa ating likas kayang pagunlad. Okay, so with that, are there questions? We kind of overshot our time. We're sorry, but there have been intermittent cutting on and off of our internet connection. I experienced that last night. That's why I really had a hard time also. Yes.
Okay, so Dr. Habito has already mentioned that our land is just 1/5 compared to our water. That's 4/5 of our area. And we have 7,641 islands with 37,000 kilometer coastline. So our focus before has really been more on terrestrial rather than our oceans and coastal areas. So we need to focus more since this constitute a larger area of our territory. So the ocean economy, Dr. Laura David already presented the description of each of these ocean economic activities, but she presented the 2015 data. PSA estimated the updated ocean economy, and it's about 3.6% of our GDP. However, this is still underestimated because there's still a lot of problems with data disaggregation. So not all the ocean-based and ocean-related industries have been accounted for. At the same time, the GDP does not measure the non-market values as mentioned by Dr. Ann de Los Angeles. So we need to really measure the supporting and regulating services. And based on Dr. Azanza's 2017 paper, it's around $1.5 trillion. The WAVES study and showed the protection showed by mangroves, but if we have the interconnected coastal ecosystems of mangroves, seagrass, and coral reefs, the coastal protection is around $1.8 billion per year. And if we look at the carbon sequestration value, the seagrass and mangroves actually capture carbon 3 times higher than terrestrial rainforest. So there's the carbon sequestration value of our coastal ecosystems are much higher than the rainforest. It's around $8.4 billion per year. So we need to really have more studies on coastal and marine resource valuation to really be able to get more robust estimates on the value of the ocean economy. So the ocean economy consists of the ocean economic activities as measured by the GDP accounts, as well as the coastal and marine ecosystem services. And then for the blue economy, it's not just about the ocean industry, it's also about how making it sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. So we have a number of examples in the region. So for fisheries and aquaculture, LGUs have already established fish sanctuaries, closed fishing season, and non-habitat restoration to allow the fish stocks to recover. There's also the climate-smart aquasilviculture, wherein they no longer destroy the mangroves, but they have fish ponds in mangrove areas, and they also piloted the integrated multi-species aquaculture. There's also the use of the new technologies as mentioned by Dr. Daly. So we're now using the electronic catch documentation traceability system for sustainable tuna fisheries. So using these modern technologies. And then for tourism, we have the ecotourism providing alternative livelihood in the marine protected areas. We're also partnering with diving operators under Greenfins program and making them partners for responsible diving as well as for monitoring and protecting the coral reefs. There are also hotels that have invested in wastewater treatment facilities, and they're using the treated wastewater for non-potable uses like water gathering and flashing toilets. And this has resulted in savings. So while there's investment cost, there's also savings in terms of the water supply. The same with the zero carbon resorts. The participating companies invested in upgrading their resorts, and this resulted in savings in electricity and water worth around more than $8 million per year. They also contributed to the climate action in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction. The same with the ports and shipping. There are 2 ports in the Philippines which got the Green Port Award from APEC. That's Batangas Port and the Cagayan de Oro Port. What's unique with the Cagayan de Oro Port is it has a shore-based power supply, supplying ships with using renewable energy. The port also has installed solar panel lighting and shore reception facilities to manage the waste from the ships. It's also using innovative technology and smart systems to improve terminal services. So if a small port like Cagayan de Oro can do it, it should other bigger ports should be able to replicate it, like in the Manila port. So the same with the other sectors. These are replicable and doable. And it could also result in good business. The ocean is also a driver of innovations, growth, and resiliency. We have the blue economy producing new medicines, as mentioned by Dr. Laura David. The marine biotechnology is a good emerging industry. There's also research on sea snails and sponges for anti-infectives, painkillers, and anti-cancer. Fish oil is a well-established industry. They're also using marine biotechnology for aquaculture, like to treat diseases in the seaweeds, the ise or ice disease, and also for seafood safety. You can also use marine biotechnology for bioremediation, so as part of pollution reduction, and also to contribute to energy like biofuel from macroalgae. And then marine renewable energy. So Laura David also mentioned the from offshore oil and gas, but there's also potential from ocean energy. So there have been some R&D studies done like in the San Bernardino Straits for OTEC and for tidal energy. But the future also is in the wind power and floating solar farms. So the Philippines is the largest wind and solar power producer in the Southeast Asian region. And there's also the new water supply from desalination, although this is energy intensive, but there's been recommendation to use renewable energy to power desalination plants. But we also have to look at the reuse of the brine because the brine has negative impacts on the marine environment. And of course, the treated wastewater is another potential water supply. So you have the blue economy contributing to the challenge in the health sector, as well as contributing to food, energy, and water security, and to the climate resiliency. So ocean is also provide jobs and livelihoods. So employment in the ocean economy is around 2.75 million people. This is about 6.7% of total employment. And out of this, you have 1.9 million people in the fisheries. So this is the updated data. And for municipal fishing, you can see that it's more than the commercial fishing. It's 250,000 more than the commercial fishing vessels. So a lot of the fishing sector is actually subsistence and artisanal. And Laura and Dr. Habito mentioned that the fishery is about 1.3% of our GDP, but that's only the fishing sector. It does not include those fish or seafood and seaweed processing, which is in the manufacturing sector, and the fish port and the wholesale and retail trade, which is in the services sector. And then one important thing is that the Philippines is also deploying sea-based overseas workers. There are about 378,000 sea-based workers, and the Filipinos is well known in the shipping industry. And these workers remit around $6.5 billion in 2019. So they also contribute to the gross national income. So aside from the GDP, we also have the GNI, which looks at the net factor income from abroad. And they also mentioned the oceans under stress. So this is just the visual presentation. So we have the impacts from mine tailings and deforestation from the uplands. We have the pollution from land-based and sea-based sources, from agricultural waste, domestic waste, industrial waste, and shipping waste. Then we also have problems of habitat loss due to conversion to fish ponds and to other coastal developments. Then we also have multiple resource use conflicts between municipal and commercial fisheries, as well as illegal entry of foreign vessels. So IUU fishing was already mentioned by Anne. And then we have the impacts from climate change in terms of rising sea level and ocean acidification, which again will impact the coastal communities and the habitats and ecosystems. So what is the economic cost? So I mentioned that the value of the ecosystems is around $1.5 trillion. In terms of the fisheries-related damages, it's already around $102 billion per year. So if we continue with the business as usual, we will end up losing these values if we don't address the overfishing, dynamite fishing, pollution, poaching, and other problems in the fisheries industry. In the Manila Bay area, we had an initial resource valuation done in 2006, and the value of the fisheries and aquaculture, ports and shipping, tourism in the Manila Bay area, as well as the value of mangroves and some coral reefs. Would you believe there's still some coral reefs and seagrass at the mouth of Manila Bay? It's around 8.3 billion pesos per year. But the cost in terms of the loss of habitats, because we lost a lot of mangrove area and there's practically no coral reefs and mangroves in the inner Manila Bay area anymore. And the impacts of water pollution from E. coli nutrients causing the eutrophication, and then also the red tide, the harmful algal blooms, which result in paralytic shellfish poisoning. The impacts on human health, the economy, and the mangrove depreciation is around 4 billion pesos. So again, if we don't address these key issues, we will lose the value of Manila Bay. Now, we use these estimates. We presented this to former President Arroyo, and due to the valuation of the mangroves in Manila Bay, she declared the mangrove area in Las Piñas and Parañaque area as critical habitat or protected area. So those are ways on how we can use the valuation in policy making. But the problem again in ocean management is the fragmented ocean governance. So we have this old National Marine Policy from 1994 and the Integrated Coastal Management Policy in 2006, but there's a lack of enforcement. There's an ICM bill that's pending in Congress, but we need to look again into this bill so that we can really incorporate the integrated coastal and marine management. There are also a lot of laws. So we have amended the Fisheries Code to address the IUU fishing, as well as other environmental laws on clean water, solid waste, hazardous toxic waste, and clean air, as well as on biodiversity. But there's no law or act on ocean, on coastal and marine management. We also have fragmented institutional arrangements. There have been these commissions established in the office of the president, but we need a more, an institutional home for ocean. Arrangements for oceans. So what can we do? What would be the next steps? So we need to have a clear understanding of the blue economy. So the blue economy is not just the ocean industry, it's not just the ecosystems, but the interrelationship of the blue economy, of the ocean economy and the ocean and coastal marine ecosystem services. And it's the sustainable use of these ecosystems, medicines, food, water, energy, for tourism, recreation, for climate resiliency, and so on. But we need to protect our coastal ecosystems and address pollution in the marine environment. So one way to do this is we need to really measure the blue economy through the ocean accounts. So previously, the Philippine Environment and Natural Resource Accounting System, they focused on the fisheries, forestry, no accounting of the mangroves, the seagrass, and the coral reefs. Moreover, the MPAs are more coral reef based, mangroves are protected, but there's no protection for seagrass. Again, seagrass is a plant, seaweeds are algal, so there's a difference between seagrass and seaweeds. And we need to also include the informal sector, and we need to assess the backward and forward linkages of the ocean economy, the trade impacts, and the multiplier effects to really see the full value of the oceans and measure the contribution of the blue economy initiatives in order to promote more of these blue economy initiatives. And we need to address the marine pollution, habitat loss, and IUU fishing. This is in line with the SDG 14, Life Below Water. So marine debris, Philippines is one of the top 5 sources of marine plastics. So we need to do more in our solid waste management to reduce use of plastics. And 90% of our wastewater is discharged without treatment. So I think Congressman Legarda mentioned the lack of wastewater treatment facilities. And if you look at our recreational water, 61% failed the standards for fecal coliform. And then most of our organic waste are contributed by the domestic and agricultural sectors. So we need to really also address the waste from livestock and from agriculture, from aquaculture also, and most especially from the domestic sector. So we need to invest more in wastewater treatment facilities. The government previously had given subsidy, but there are only a few takers from the local government units. So we need to convince local government units to invest more in wastewater treatment facilities. So for ecosystem habitat loss, you can see from coral reefs, in 2009, it was estimated there were 2.5 million hectares of coral reefs. Now it's only 798,000 hectares. Same for seagrass beds, 2.73 million hectares in 2009, it's now only 489,000 hectares in 2016. For mangroves, there's been an increase because of the National Greening Program. So there are efforts in planting mangroves. However, there are problems when some LGUs planted mangroves in mudflats and seagrass areas, which are different ecosystems. So while they increase the mangroves, they destroy the other ecosystems. So there's a need to provide more guidance to the LGUs that are doing the mangrove planting. And for MPAs, it's now around 8% of our territorial waters. Our commitment to the Aichi biodiversity target and to the SDG 14 is that by 2020, at least 10% of our waters have been protected. So we need to do more to increase the MPA area. And as I mentioned, we need to also include the seagrass beds in our marine protected areas. So I mentioned again also the lack of ocean governance. So we need probably to look into a bill on coastal and ocean management. That bill should include the blue economy, wherein the blue economy is integrated into the economic development plans and investment plans. And then include the ocean accounts in the environmental and resource accounting. And again, the ocean accounts include both the ocean industries from the GDP accounts as well as the valuation of coastal marine ecosystem services. Then we have to look at the institutional arrangements. So currently we have a committee under the Office of the President. One option is to have a commission similar to the climate change, but again, there are some issues on that. The other option is to have a new department on marine affairs, similar to what Japan, South Korea, Indonesia have done. So the institutional arrangements should have intersectoral integration and intergovernmental integration, vertical integration with local governments and the national governments, and the spatial integration between land and ocean sides, because both areas affect each other. And the the science and economic interdisciplinary management integration, and to also address transboundary issues, especially in the West Philippine Sea, Sulu-Sulawesi Sea, and the Philippine Sea on the eastern seaboard. So this is I already showed this slide on the pressures. So we need to address the problem from ridge to reef or from hilltops to oceans. That's the H2O, the water. So currently, in the environmental management, DNR, they have the integrated river basin management system for the river basin area. There's also the policy on coastal management, EO 533, and then the 1994 EO on marine policy on integrated ocean management. However, there's no comprehensive law addressing all these areas. There's also a proposed bill on the land use plan, and LGUs are actually required to have land use plans. but they're not required to have sea-use plans. And we don't have integrated land and sea-use plans. We've done a pilot in Bataan, and we developed an integrated land and sea-use plan in Bataan, but it has to be updated. And maybe it needs to be replicated in other areas. But again, a policy or a law that would mandate LGUs to have this integrated land and sea use plan would be more better to force them to have these plans in place. So again, Blue Economy is for sustainable, healthy, and resilient oceans, people, and economy. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so
with that, I would like to end this webinar, and I look forward to working with our team. I'll try to get from you all of the presenters. If you have any more changes, you're not limited now by the time. If you have changes, because I will make this accessible to the National Capital Project of Stanford, and I hope that we will have a relationship with them so that they can conduct also training seminars or whatever we need, no, from them. So with that, I'd like to close, and we thank our MAPSEC, Joanna especially, and Arnold. Joanna has been helping a lot. No, look at our flyer. No, we were able to rust that. Actually, that's the same. This picture is the picture in the flyer that we had to put down so that we can have more narrative on top of it. No, but that is Coral. Somebody was asking me, is that a picture that I took? No, I'm a good enough photographer, but I'm not an underwater photographer. So that's quite difficult to get.